There is something almost sacred about an airport. At 4:30 in the morning, Captain Maya Jackson whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the terminal's air conditioning system. The vast concourses of Denver International Airport stretched before her like cathedral naves, bathed in the cool, sterile glow of fluorescent lights. At this hour, the usual chaos of rolling luggage and frantic announcements had given way to an almost reverential quiet. The air carried the scent of industrial cleaner jet fuel and the promising aroma of freshly brewed coffee, wafting from a kiosk just beginning its day. Maya moved with practiced efficiency, her regulation black pilot's bag trailing silently behind her. At 36, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven herself in far more challenging environments than this. Her uniform was impeccable, 4 golden stripes gleaming on each epaulette, every crease precisely where it should be. It wasn't vanity that drove this attention to detail, but a deep respect for what those stripes represented, not just authority, but responsibility. The early morning light cast shadows across her face, highlighting cheekbones that had become sharper since her days at the Air Force Academy. She paused briefly, touching the small worn silver pendant hidden beneath her uniform, her grandmother's given to her before her first solo flight, with whispered words that still guided her. The sky has no color lines, child. Remember that when the ground tries to hold you back. Her military career had been exemplary by any standard. After graduating near the top of her class, she'd flown C-17 Globemasters into some of the most challenging airfields in the world. War zones with improvised runways, humanitarian missions with weather conditions that would ground most pilots, emergency evacuations where timing meant the difference between life and death. It was during one particularly harrowing mission in Afghanistan that she'd earned her call sign Phoenix. The story had become something of a legend. Engine failure over mountainous terrain, a cabin full of wounded soldiers, and weather closing in fast. Any other pilot might have panicked. Maya had remained ice cold, executing an emergency landing procedure that her flight instructor later described as textbook perfect under impossible conditions. "You okay today?" Captain Jackson called out a janitor she knew by sight, but not name one of the overnight crew who'd seen her pass through countless times before dawn. "Just fine, Jerome," she replied with a genuine smile. "How's that grandson of yours doing with those flight simulator lessons, man? That boy's obsessed now. Talking about applying to the academy someday. Tell him to look me up when he gets there. I'm always happy to mentor young dreamers." These small moments of connection grounded her in a way that few things could. Maya's father, a former postal worker who'd never finished high school, had taught her that the measure of character wasn't how you treated people who could help you, but how you acknowledged those the world often rendered invisible. After 10 years of military service, she'd transitioned to commercial aviation, seeking a different kind of challenge. The schedule would allow her to put down roots, maybe even start the family she'd been postponing. She found both opportunity and obstacles at Horizon Air. Horizon was a mid-tier carrier with outsized ambitions. They weren't a legacy giant like United or American, but they weren't a budget airline either. They occupied that precarious middle ground, fighting for routes and market share against competitors with deeper pockets and more established brands. Maya had risen quickly through their ranks. Her military training and exceptional skill in the simulator had fast-tracked her to captain on the Boeing 737 fleet. Within 3 years, she had become one of the airline's check airmen, an elite pilot responsible for training and evaluating other captains. It was a position of considerable prestige, usually reserved for pilots with decades of commercial experience. As she walked through the empty terminal, Maya allowed herself a small smile. Today wasn't just another flight. Today was the culmination of everything she'd worked for. Today was the day that Horizon Air either secured its future or lost everything, and they had chosen her to be at the controls. Flight 717 from Denver to San Francisco wasn't just another route on the Horizon Air schedule. It represented nothing less than the airline's salvation. For the past 18 months, Horizon had been dancing on the edge of financial disaster. Fuel costs had spiked. A labor dispute with the mechanics union had resulted in costly concessions. 2 of their older aircraft had required unexpected major maintenance. Their credit rating had been downgraded, making it more expensive to lease new planes. The pandemic had dealt them a blow from which they'd never fully recovered. But then came quantum dynamics. The tech giant had revolutionized artificial intelligence and quantum computing, making its founder and CEO, Alexander Hawkins, one of the wealthiest men in the world. Based in San Francisco with satellite offices in 6 countries, Quantum's corporate travel budget alone was worth millions annually. More importantly, they had a reputation for demanding excellence from their partners and for rewarding it handsomely. The deal that Horizon Air had somehow managed to secure was beyond anyone's wildest expectations. An exclusive 10-year partnership worth $4.5 billion. Under the agreement, Horizon would become Quantum's official airline partner, handling all their corporate travel needs, establishing new routes to Quantum's global offices, and even emblazoning Quantum's sleek logo on a portion of their fleet. It's the aviation equivalent of winning the lottery. Maya's mother had said, when she'd called to share the news about being selected for the inaugural flight. Just don't forget who you are when all those tech billionaires start treating you like a celebrity. Her mother's practical wisdom always cut to the heart of things. Dr. Elaine Jackson had raised Maya alone after her father's early death, balancing her career as a history professor with the demands of single parenthood. She'd taught Maya that excellence wasn't optional for Black women. It was a prerequisite just to get in the door. For a mid-sized carrier like Horizon, this wasn't just a contract, it was a lifeline. The immediate cash infusion would allow them to upgrade their aging fleet, expand routes, and finally compete with the industry giants on something approaching equal footing. Wall Street had reacted accordingly. Horizon's stock had jumped 27% the day the preliminary agreement was announced, pushing shares from $32.75 to $41.59 overnight, the largest single-day gain in the company's history. Today's flight was the inaugural service under that partnership. Flight 717 would carry not just regular passengers, but a delegation of Quantum executives, including Catherine Sullivan, the Executive Vice President of Global Operations. Sullivan was Hawkins's right hand, his most trusted lieutenant, and by all accounts just as demanding as her boss. The flight would be operated on one of Horizon's brand new Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft, acquired specifically for the Quantum contract. The plane still smelled of fresh leather and factory-new composites. The crew had been hand-picked. The catering was premium. Even the route had been optimized to avoid potential turbulence. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could be allowed to go wrong. Maya had been selected to command this flight not by chance, but by specific request. James Morrison, Horizon's CEO, had personally called her 2 weeks earlier. Captain Jackson, he'd said, his voice carrying that peculiar mix of authority and desperation, unique to executives with their backs against the wall. I need our best pilot on this inaugural Quantum flight. Everything, and I do mean everything, depends on making a flawless impression. Maya understood what remained unsaid. As one of the few Black female captains in commercial aviation, she represented the diverse, forward-thinking image Horizon wanted to project to Quantum, a company known for its progressive values. But she had no illusions. She hadn't been chosen solely as a symbol. Her record spoke for itself. She had the highest ratings in the simulator zero incidents in her file, and a reputation for smooth landings even in challenging conditions. The Quantum contract included strict performance metrics, on-time departure and arrival rates, customer satisfaction scores, baggage handling efficiency. Failure to meet these targets could trigger penalty clauses or even contract termination. Flight 716 would set the tone for everything that followed. Maya felt the weight of these expectations as she moved through the terminal. Thousands of jobs, including her own, depended on the success of this partnership. Horizon had bet everything on Quantum, and Quantum had made it clear they expected nothing short of excellence. This morning's flight was scheduled for a 6:30 a.m. departure, time to get the Quantum executives to San Francisco for a 9:00 a.m. meeting. The aircraft had been at the gate overnight, prepped and ready. The cabin crew had arrived an hour earlier to prepare the cabin. Everything was in place for a textbook operation. As Maya approached the staff coffee kiosk near Concourse B, she spotted a familiar figure already waiting with 2 cups in hand. It was time to meet her first officer and begin the day that would either save Horizon Air or witness its first steps toward oblivion. "Morning, Captain Thomas Carter," said, extending a steaming cup of black coffee. "Figured you'd need the high-octane stuff today." Maya accepted the cup with a nod of appreciation. "Thanks, Thomas. You're a lifesaver." Thomas Carter had been her regular first officer for nearly 3 years. At 46, he was a decade her senior, with silver threading through his temple hair, giving him the distinguished look of a pilot from a bygone era. He'd come to commercial aviation from a different path than Maya, 20 years flying corporate jets for oil executives, before joining Horizon in search of more stable hours as he approached retirement. They made an effective team, where Maya was methodical and by the book. Thomas brought experience and intuition. He knew the quirks of every aircraft in the fleet, could predict turbulence patterns before weather radar confirmed them, and had an almost supernatural ability to smooth out rough air with subtle control adjustments. "Big day," Thomas remarked, taking a sip from his own cup. "Morrison himself called me yesterday to make sure I understood the historic significance of our flight." He rolled his eyes slightly, as if we'd forget we're hauling half of Quantum's executive team. Maya smiled. "He called me too. Twice. I think he'd fly the plane himself if he could. God help us all if he did." Thomas chuckled. "Man can barely operate the coffee machine in the pilot lounge. Remember when he tried to impress that FAA inspector and ended up with cappuccino foam all over his tie?" Maya laughed genuinely, the kind of easy laughter that only happened with colleagues she trusted. "I thought he was going to fire the coffee machine." They found a quiet corner of the nearly empty food court and spread out their flight documentation. The flight plan showed a clean route, Denver to San Francisco, estimated flight time of 2 hours and 47 minutes, cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. Weather was cooperative, clear skies over the Rockies, with some light clouds expected on approach to SFO, but nothing that would impact their arrival time. "I reviewed the maintenance log," Thomas said, his tone shifting to professional precision. "They replaced an oxygen sensor last night, but everything checked out. Brand new bird, so we shouldn't have any surprises." Maya nodded, scanning the passenger manifest. 146 passengers, including the Quantum delegation in first class. Catherine Sullivan is in 2A. The infamous Catherine Sullivan. Thomas mused. "I've heard stories. Supposedly she once had a flight attendant fired for spilling water on her laptop. Urban legend." Maya replied, though she wasn't entirely sure. Quantum's executives had a reputation for exacting standards. "Let's just make sure we give her a smooth ride." As they continued reviewing documentation, Maya noticed Thomas watching her with a peculiar expression. "Something on your mind?" she asked. Thomas hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Just thinking about what this flight means. For the company, sure, but also—" He paused. "Look, I've been flying a long time. I've seen how this industry treats people who don't fit the old mold." Maya knew what he was referring to. Despite significant progress, commercial aviation remained predominantly white and male. As a black woman in the captain's seat, She remained a rarity, something passengers occasionally remarked on, sometimes with surprise, sometimes with suspicion. "I'm used to it," she replied simply. "You shouldn't have to be," Thomas said. "Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm proud to be your FO today. This flight matters." "Thanks for that," Maya said, feeling a genuine wave of appreciation for her colleague's support. "You know what my grandmother used to tell me? The sky has no color lines. It's the ground where people start drawing them." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Smart woman, your grandmother. Smartest I ever knew. Cleaned houses for airline executives her whole life, so my mom could go to college. Never flew on a plane herself, but made damn sure I believed I could fly them." The moment of earnestness passed quickly as they returned to their pre-flight routine, but Maya appreciated the sentiment. Thomas had always been a solid presence in the cockpit, never questioning her authority or expertise. In an industry where she often had to work twice as hard for half the respect, his straightforward professionalism was refreshing. Their coffee finished, they gathered their materials and headed toward the security checkpoint that would take them to the airside area. They'd need to complete their pre-flight inspections, brief the cabin crew, and ensure everything was perfect before passengers began boarding at 5:45 a.m. "Ready to make history?" Thomas asked as they approached the checkpoint. Maya smiled. "Let's just focus on making our arrival time." As they passed through security, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of anticipation. In a few hours, Horizon Air's future would be secure, and her role in that success would be another accomplishment in a career built on excellence. What she couldn't know was that before she even reached the aircraft, events would be set in motion that would change not just her career, but the entire airline industry. The incident 3 months earlier in Chicago should have been a warning sign not just for Maya, but for Horizon Air as a whole. She had been completing her walk-around inspection of the aircraft when a ground operations supervisor approached her. The man, middle-aged with a weathered face and a clipboard clutched like a shield, had looked at her uniform, then at her face, his expression cycling through confusion to suspicion. "Excuse me, miss," he'd said, his tone making the address feel like an accusation. "This area is restricted to flight crew and ground personnel only." Maya had gestured to the 4 stripes on her epaulettes. "I'm the captain. Just finishing my external inspection." The supervisor had frowned, looking her up and down once more. "You got ID, because I know all our captains on this route." And here she'd interrupted, pulling out her airline credentials and FAA license. The documents were met with a level of scrutiny that bordered on theatrical, the man turning them over, holding them up to the light, comparing the photo to her face multiple times. Eventually, with obvious reluctance, he'd handed them back. No apology, just a muttered, "Can't be too careful these days." That night, alone in her hotel room, Maya had called her best friend Jasmine, a surgeon who faced similar challenges in her own profession. "I swear, Jas, sometimes I just want to wear a sign that says, 'Yes, I'm actually the captain,' and be done with it." "Girl, I feel you." Jasmine had laughed. "I've got patients who still look at my male residence for confirmation after I've just told them I'll be performing their surgery. We should get matching t-shirts." "Yes, I'm qualified to save your life. Fly your plane." The shared gallows humor had helped, but it didn't erase the frustration. Maya had filed a report about the incident following company protocol for documenting security concerns. 2 weeks later, she received a boilerplate email from Human Resources. "After review, this has been classified as a miscommunication. No further action required." It wasn't an isolated occurrence. 6 months before that, a passenger had refused to board after seeing her in the cockpit during pre-boarding. The man had loudly demanded to speak to the actual pilot, causing a scene that delayed departure by 20 minutes. The gate agent had apologized profusely to the passenger, not to Maya, and offered him a voucher for his inconvenience. Then there was the training session last year, where a newly hired first officer had repeatedly addressed questions to Thomas, despite Maya being the instructor. When she'd finally called him out on it, he'd seemed genuinely confused. "Sorry, I just assumed," he'd begun before trailing off into uncomfortable silence. Each incident on its own could be dismissed as an unfortunate misunderstanding. Taken together, they formed a pattern, one that Horizon Air seemed determined not to recognize. The company culture was contradictory in a way that was becoming increasingly common in corporate America. Their public-facing materials celebrated diversity. Their hiring brochures featured carefully balanced representations of gender and ethnicity. Their CEO gave interviews about inclusion being a core value. Yet when Maya and other minority employees raised concerns about their actual experiences, the response was always the same: minimize, document, forget. Issues were treated as isolated incidents, rather than connected points in a troubling pattern. Reports disappeared into administrative black holes. Mandatory sensitivity training was conducted with all the enthusiasm of a tax audit. Maya had once overheard two white male captains joking in the crew lounge about the diversity hire quota after a black female pilot had left the room. They hadn't seen Maya sitting in the corner, tablet in hand. She'd considered reporting it, then remembered what had happened to Tanya Williams, who'd filed a harassment complaint only to find herself consistently assigned the least desirable routes and overnight stays in what everyone knew was retaliation, though nothing could be proven. During her annual review last year, Maya's supervisor, a white man in his 50s who had been with the airline since its founding, had praised her technical skills, but suggested she could help create a more harmonious atmosphere by being less sensitive about misunderstandings. She'd considered filing a formal complaint, but ultimately decided against it. The aviation industry was smaller than outsiders realized. Pilots who developed reputations as difficult found themselves passed over for promotions assigned less desirable routes or subjected to increased scrutiny. Maya had worked too hard to risk her career over what the company would undoubtedly classify as another miscommunication. Instead, she had channeled her frustration into excellence. Every flight plan was meticulous. Every landing was butter smooth. Every regulation was followed to the letter. If she couldn't change the culture through complaints, she would do it through example by being so demonstrably good at her job that her competence couldn't be questioned. This approach had earned her the check airman position, the respect of her peers, and ultimately the assignment to the all-important Quantum inaugural flight. It was a vindication of sorts, proof that merit could eventually overcome prejudice. But as Maya and Thomas approached Gate B-48 for their historic flight, she couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. Horizon Air had fundamental problems that no amount of individual excellence could solve. The airline's repeated failure to address these issues wasn't just wrong. It was a vulnerability, a crack in the foundation that could eventually threaten the entire structure. What Maya couldn't know as she walked toward the gate was just how quickly that crack was about to widen into a chasm, and how the events of the next hour would expose not just the flaws in Horizon's culture, but the fatal weakness in its future. The scene at Gate B-48 was the controlled chaos typical of an early morning departure. Passengers formed a disorganized line, clutching boarding passes and oversized neck pillows. Business travelers tapped impatiently at their phones. Parents tried to corral sleepy children. The distinctive aroma of airport coffee mingled with the scent of too many bodies in too small a space. Maya and Thomas approached the gate desk, where a woman in her late 40s was typing furiously at a computer terminal. Her Horizon Air uniform was meticulously pressed, but her name tag sat slightly askew. Regina Wallace, gate agent. Her face was set in the strained expression of someone who had been dealing with tired, impatient travelers since before dawn. "Looks like a full flight," Thomas observed, glancing at the crowded waiting area. And running behind already, Maya noted, checking her watch. Boarding should have started 5 minutes ago. She scanned the gate area, her pilot's eye automatically noting details that might affect the flight. The elderly passenger who might need extra time to board the family, with 3 small children, who would require assistance, the businessman, with the oversized carry-on that would inevitably cause storage issues. In the first-class waiting area, a woman in a tailored charcoal suit sat reviewing documents on a tablet. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about her presence, the way she held herself, the precision of her movements, the aura of authority that seemed to create an invisible buffer zone around her seat. Catherine Sullivan, Maya guessed. The quantum executive's reputation for intensity apparently wasn't exaggerated. Their eyes met briefly across the terminal. Sullivan's gaze was evaluative, measuring holding for just a beat longer than casual observation would warrant. As a black woman who had spent years in Silicon Valley's predominantly white male tech industry, Sullivan had developed a keen radar for recognizing potential allies in unexpected places and for identifying institutional problems before they affected her company's interests. She studied Maya's uniform with interest, noting the captain's stripes with what appeared to be approval before returning to her tablet. "Think she's judging the operation already?" Thomas murmured. "Wouldn't you be?" Maya replied. $4 billion buys a lot of scrutiny. As they approached the desk, Regina looked up briefly, then returned her attention to her screen. A passenger had just stepped away, looking frustrated after what appeared to be a difficult interaction. "Good morning," Maya said, her voice clear and professional. "Captain Jackson and First Officer Carter for Flight 717 to San Francisco. We're heading down to the aircraft for pre-flight checks." Thomas presented his ID, which Regina gave a cursory glance before waving him through the crew access door. "Go ahead," she mumbled, her focus unbroken from the monitor. Maya stepped forward, credentials in hand, assuming the same courtesy would be extended to her. But as she moved toward the door, Regina suddenly held up a hand, a gesture as sharp and dismissive as a slammed door. "Hold on a sec," Regina said, not looking up from her screen. "We're boarding priority passengers first." The comment was so unexpected that Maya paused, momentarily confused. "I'm the captain," she stated simply. "I need to access the aircraft for pre-flight inspections." Regina finally lifted her gaze, her eyes scanning Maya's uniform with a look that hovered somewhere between confusion and suspicion. A flicker of something, disbelief perhaps, or annoyance crossed her face as she took in the 4 captain's stripes on Maya's shoulders. Her eyebrows lifted fractionally, lips pursing. "The flight crew is already boarding," Regina said, her tone now carrying a patronizing edge. "You'll need to wait outside with the other passengers." The words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. "Wait outside." The phrase carried unmistakable weight, echoing with historical significance that wasn't lost on Maya. She felt a sudden hollowness in her stomach, a cold, familiar sensation that came whenever she encountered this particular brand of dismissal. From the corner of her eye, Maya noticed a subtle movement. Catherine Sullivan had looked up from her tablet, her attention now fixed on the interaction at the gate desk. Her expression was unreadable, but her focus was absolute. A young mother standing nearby in line had also noticed the exchange, her eyes widening slightly as she glanced between Maya's captain's uniform and Regina's dismissive posture. She whispered something to her husband, who turned to look. "There must be a misunderstanding," Maya said, keeping her voice level. "First Officer Carter just went through. This is our flight. I'm Captain Maya Jackson." She placed her airline-issued credentials and FAA pilot's license on the counter, sliding them toward Regina with a deliberate, calm movement. "You can verify my identity." Regina glanced at the IDs without picking them up, a dismissive flick of her eyes that didn't constitute a proper security check by any standard protocol. With one finger, she pushed the credentials back across the counter. "Like I said," Regina insisted, her voice rising slightly. "The pilots are already accounted for. We have a male captain for this flight. I saw him myself." She gestured vaguely toward the jetway. "Now please step aside. You're holding up the line." Behind Maya, a businessman sighed loudly, checking his watch with an exaggerated gesture. "What's the holdup?" he called out. The lie was so blatant, so absurd, that Maya was momentarily speechless. Thomas was right there, visible through the glass door of the jet bridge, waiting for her. The flight plan, the crew manifest, every single piece of official documentation had her name listed as pilot in command. Maya felt a cold knot of anger tighten in her stomach. This wasn't a mistake anymore. This was a deliberate act of obstruction, fueled by a prejudice so deeply ingrained that the woman in front of her was choosing to believe a reality she had invented rather than the decorated officer standing before her. She was acutely aware that the confrontation was drawing attention. The boarding line had gone quiet. Passengers were watching with undisguised curiosity, and still in her peripheral vision, Catherine Sullivan observed everything. Her tablet now set aside her full attention on the unfolding scene. This was the moment where Maya had a choice: back down, to avoid further embarrassment, or stand her ground and assert her rightful authority. It was a familiar crossroads, one that many in her position faced daily in situations large and small. The path of least resistance versus the harder road of principle. For Maya Jackson, there was really no choice at all. "You are mistaken," Maya said, her voice losing its warmth, replaced by the steely tone of command she used when dealing with critical in-flight situations. "You have allowed my first officer to board while denying me the captain access to the aircraft. You are now actively interfering with the duties of a flight crew member. I am asking you one last time to scan my credentials and open this door." Regina's face hardened, her eyes narrowing. "Listen, she started, then recalibrated. "Ma'am, if you don't step away from the desk right now, I'll have to call security." The threat of security was a line crossed. It transformed the situation from a dispute over credentials into an accusation. Maya was no longer being treated as a pilot being inconvenienced, but as a potential threat, someone to be controlled, removed, potentially even arrested. Maya's pulse quickened, but her exterior remained calm, the same compartmentalized focus she'd mastered during engine failures and hydraulic emergencies. She could feel her grandmother's pendant against her skin, a small weight carrying the gravity of generations who had faced down prejudice with dignity. "Go ahead," Maya replied, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "Call them. And while you're at it, get me your station manager. Now." She didn't move an inch. Her eyes, unwavering, remained locked on Regina's. The gate agent, flustered, but emboldened by her own misguided sense of authority, reached for the phone. "We have a situation at gate B48, Regina said into the receiver, her voice rising nervously. "A woman claiming, there's someone here saying she's a pilot and won't." "Yes, I need a manager and security. Quick." Through the jet bridge door, Thomas had noticed the confrontation. He pushed back through, his face etched with concern and growing anger. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, looking between Maya and Regina. "Your captain is being denied access to the aircraft," Maya replied, her voice steady, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "That's ridiculous. She's Captain Jackson. She's commanding this flight." Regina seemed unmoved. "Sir, please return to the aircraft. We're handling this situation." "There is no situation to handle," Thomas insisted, voice rising. "This is Captain Maya Jackson. She's not only our captain today, she's a check airman. She trains other captains." Regina's expression flickered briefly, perhaps the first hint of uncertainty, but she quickly regained her composure. I have my instructions. The manifest I'm showing has a different captain assigned. That's impossible, Thomas said. Check again. I don't need to check again, Regina snapped. I know what I'm looking at. An older woman in the boarding line spoke up unexpectedly. I've flown with Captain Jackson before, she said, her voice carrying the authority of her years. Best landing I've ever experienced. A ripple went through the waiting passengers, murmurs, confused looks, phones being raised to capture the unfolding scene. Maya noticed that Catherine Sullivan had risen from her seat and moved closer to the desk, still maintaining enough distance to observe without directly involving herself. The executive had removed her phone from her purse and was holding it at waist level, not obviously recording, but positioned to capture the exchange. Other passengers were less subtle. Several had phones raised, clearly documenting the confrontation. An older white man in a business suit shook his head in disapproval, though whether at Maya or Regina wasn't clear. A young woman of color looked on with an expression of pained recognition. Listen, a businessman in line called out, irritation clear in his voice. Some of us have connections to make. Can't you just let her on the plane and sort this out later? Sir, please, Regina replied tensely. This is a security matter. The confrontation had now passed the point where it could be quietly resolved. It had become a spectacle, a public humiliation unfolding in real time before a plane full of witnesses, including the very VIP passengers that Horizon was desperate to impress. Maya felt a complex wave of emotions: anger at the blatant discrimination, embarrassment at being the center of this scene, and a growing sense of resolve. This wasn't just about her now. This was about every pilot of color who had faced similar barriers, every professional woman who had been asked to wait outside, every qualified person who had been judged not by their credentials, but by biased assumptions about what authority should look like. Regina, Maya said, using the gate agent's name deliberately, I want to be very clear about what's happening here. You are refusing to verify the identity of the captain of this flight. You are preventing me from performing my pre-flight duties. You are creating a security breach by not following proper identification protocols. And you are doing all of this in front of our passengers, including representatives from Quantum Dynamics. At the mention of Quantum, Regina's expression changed slightly, a flash of recognition, perhaps even fear. The gate agent glanced toward Catherine Sullivan, who was still watching the scene unfold with laser focus. I'm simply following procedure, Regina insisted, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Her fingers tapped nervously on the keyboard, eyes darting between the screen and Maya's steady gaze. No, you're not, Maya replied. Procedure requires you to verify my credentials, which you have refused to do. Procedure requires you to grant access to identified flight crew members, which you have not done. You are not following any procedure recognized by this airline or the FAA. A small crowd had gathered now. The boarding process had effectively halted. Passengers who had been queued up were now spectators to a drama none of them had anticipated when purchasing their tickets. Through the window, Maya could see their aircraft Horizon's gleaming new 737 MAX 9, painted with special Quantum Partnership livery, sitting at the gate, like an artifact from another reality, one where this humiliating scene wasn't unfolding. The manifest says, Regina began, but Maya cut her off. Show me. Regina blinked. What? Show me this manifest you keep referring to. Show me where it says I'm not the assigned captain for this flight. Regina hesitated, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. Her eyes flickered toward the screen, then away again too quickly. It was the tell of someone who knew they were caught in a lie, but couldn't find a way out. Before she could respond, a commotion at the edge of the gate area signaled the arrival of new players in the unfolding drama. Two figures approached rapidly, a uniformed airport security officer and a man in a Navy suit with a Horizon Air Management badge flipping against his chest. William Bennett, the Denver station manager, looked harried, his tie slightly askew, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. Bennett was a company man in his 50s, a middle manager whose 20-year career at Horizon had been built on a simple principle: protect the company, protect his staff, and resolve problems with minimal disruption. Unfortunately, his definition of resolving often meant siding with his staff by default and quelling any situation that threatened the orderly operation of his station, regardless of who was actually in the right. "What's going on here?" Bennett asked, looking first to Regina, not Maya. "This woman," Regina began, pointing an accusatory finger, "is trying to access the aircraft. She claims to be the captain, but she's not on my manifest. When I asked her to wait with the other passengers, she became aggressive and refused to leave the desk." Bennett's eyes fell on Maya, taking in her uniform, the captain's stripes, her composed demeanor. But instead of asking for her side of the story or examining her credentials, he made a split-second judgment based on what he was seeing: a distressed employee and a situation that needed containment. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside so we can sort this out." Bennett said, his tone firm and dismissive. A young mother in line gasped audibly. "Are you kidding me? She's wearing a captain's uniform." "Sir," Maya replied, her patience worn dangerously thin, "I am Captain Maya Jackson. This is my flight 717 to San Francisco. Your gate agent has refused to verify my identification and is preventing me from accessing the aircraft to perform my duties." Thomas stepped forward again. "Sir, she's telling the truth. Captain Jackson is our assigned pilot in command. I'm First Officer Carter. We were both heading to the aircraft when your agent stopped the captain, but let me through." Bennett shot Thomas a withering look, a silent command to fall in line with authority. He then turned back to Maya, his expression hardening. "Look, I don't know what kind of misunderstanding we have here," Bennett said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But Regina has been a gate agent for 12 years. She knows what she's doing. We have protocols to follow. Then follow them." Maya said, her voice cool and precise. "Verify my identification properly. Check the official flight plan. Call Operations Control if you need to confirm the crew assignment. These are all standard protocols that your agent has refused to implement." Bennett's jaw tightened. He was being challenged publicly, and his response was not to investigate the facts, but to reassert control. "This is disrupting our boarding process," he said. "If you don't step aside voluntarily, I'll have to ask security to escort you from the gate area." The security officer shifted uncomfortably. Unlike Bennett, he seemed to recognize the potential gravity of the situation. He could see the 4 stripes on Maya's shoulders and the growing number of passengers recording the confrontation on their phones. "Sir," the officer said quietly to Bennett, "maybe we should just verify her ID. Standard procedure." "I know the procedures at my own airline," Bennett snapped, cutting him off. Maya took a deep breath, centering herself. This was rapidly escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding into something much more serious. Bennett wasn't just supporting his employee's mistake. He was compounding it, transforming a procedural error into a potential legal nightmare. Catherine Sullivan had moved even closer now, standing just a few feet away. Her phone was more obviously positioned to record, and her expression had shifted from neutral observation to something that looked remarkably like controlled fury. Maya glanced around the gate area, taking in the scene. Passengers were no longer even pretending to wait for boarding. They were fully engaged in the drama unfolding before them. Some looked confused, others uncomfortable. A few seemed angry, though, whether at her or at the airline staff wasn't clear. A memory flashed through Maya's mind, her mother's voice. "There will be moments when you're the only one who knows you're right. Stand anyway." "Mr. Bennett," Maya said, her voice steady and deliberate. "I want to be absolutely clear about what's happening here. I am the assigned captain for Flight 7117. I have presented valid identification, which your staff has refused to properly verify. You are now threatening to have me removed by security rather than following basic security protocols to confirm my identity and authority. This is not only a violation of company policy, but potentially of federal aviation regulations regarding crew access and security procedures. Bennett's face flushed. Being lectured on policy, especially in front of passengers, was clearly not something he was accustomed to. He started, then caught himself. I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate being prevented from doing my job because your staff refuses to acknowledge my authority as captain. Maya countered. Thomas, who had been watching with growing disbelief, spoke up again. Sir, this is absurd. Captain Jackson is one of Horizon's most senior pilots. She's a Czech airman, for God's sake. This is the inaugural quantum flight, and you're creating a scene over something that could be resolved with a 30-second phone call to operations. The mention of quantum seemed to register with Bennett, whose eyes darted briefly toward Catherine Sullivan. For the first time, he appeared to grasp that this confrontation was happening in front of the very VIPs. Horizon was desperate to impress. His response, however, was not to correct course, but to double down a classic managerial instinct to present a unified front rather than admit a mistake. If you're who you say you are, Bennett said to Maya, then this can all be straightened out away from the gate. Please come with me to the office and we'll sort it out there. It was a transparent attempt to move the confrontation out of public view, to hide the problem rather than solve it. No, Maya said simply. I need to be on that aircraft conducting pre-flight checks. We're already behind schedule because of this situation. Call operations control right now and confirm my assignment. Bennett's face darkened. I've asked you nicely. This is the final time I'm going to request that you step aside before I have security remove you from the gate area. The security officer looked increasingly uncomfortable with his role in this escalating situation. He could see Maya's credentials on the counter, her professional demeanor, and the growing number of passengers recording every word. Sir, he murmured to Bennett, I really think we should just verify. Do your job, Bennett hissed at him. This was the moment of decision for Maya. She could continue to argue to be humiliated and potentially physically removed from the gate, or she could use the power she rightfully held. The power not just of her rank, but of the immense responsibility that came with it. Maya had faced critical decisions before, moments where lives hung in the balance, where there was no perfect choice, only the least damaging option. In the cockpit of a C-17 with failing hydraulics over hostile territory, during an aborted takeoff with 180 souls on board, when severe turbulence had injured a flight attendant at 37,000 feet. This was different, yet somehow the same. It wasn't about physical danger, but it carried its own kind of peril to her dignity, to her career, to the safety culture that was the foundation of aviation. As she stood at gate B-48, surrounded by staring passengers and confronted by airline staff who refused to acknowledge her authority, memories cascaded through her mind. She remembered her first solo flight as a cadet, the exhilarating freedom of commanding an aircraft alone. She remembered the skeptical looks from instructors when she'd announced her intention to fly military transport planes instead of fighters, as if a woman, particularly a black woman, couldn't handle the heavy iron. She remembered proving them wrong mission after mission, evaluation after evaluation. She remembered her grandmother, who had cleaned the homes of airline executives for decades, coming home with stories about their lavish lifestyles and casual disregard for the help. The same grandmother who had saved every spare penny to buy 8-year-old Maya a model airplane and told her, "Baby, don't you ever let anyone tell you where you can't go." She remembered her transition to commercial aviation, the subtle and not so subtle slights. The passengers who did double takes when they saw her in the cockpit during boarding. The first officers who sometimes questioned her decisions in ways they never would with male captains. The flight attendants who occasionally reported to Thomas first, despite her being the commanding officer. She remembered the Chicago incident just 3 months ago, swept under the rug like it never happened, and the passenger who had refused to board, and the training session where she'd been invisible despite being the instructor. Each of these moments had required a decision: push back or let it go, make an issue or move on. Throughout her career, Maya had mostly chosen the latter path, believing that excellence would eventually overcome prejudice. She had channeled her frustration into perfection, betting that impeccable performance would eventually render bias irrelevant. But standing here now, prevented from doing her job by the very people who should be facilitating it, she realized the limits of that approach. Individual excellence couldn't fix broken systems. Silent endurance didn't create change. More than that, she realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. Every passenger watching this unfold was learning something about Horizon Air, about its values, its culture, its priorities. The quantum executives were seeing in real time how this airline operated when tested. And most critically, this public refusal to follow basic security protocols represented a fundamental breakdown in the safety culture that was supposed to be a non-negotiable foundation of commercial aviation. A Hispanic flight attendant, her name tag read Maria Rodriguez, had emerged from the jetway eyes wide as she took in the scene. The young woman looked from Bennett to Maya, her expression reflecting an inner conflict that Maya recognized all too well: the struggle between speaking up and self-preservation. "Captain Jackson," Maria said hesitantly, "is everything okay?" Before Maya could answer, Bennett cut in sharply. "Return to the aircraft, Ms. Rodriguez. This doesn't concern you." Maria flinched but held her ground. "Sir, this is our captain for today's flight. I reviewed the crew manifest this morning." That small act of courage, a junior crew member risking her position to speak truth, crystallized Maya's decision. In that moment of clarity, Captain Maya Jackson made her choice. She slowly reached down and picked up her credentials from the counter, tucking them neatly back into her wallet. She straightened her uniform jacket, adjusted her epaulettes, and looked William Bennett directly in the eye. "Mr. Bennett," she began, her voice carrying a weight and authority that seemed to command the attention of everyone within earshot. "You and your agent have created a situation that fundamentally compromises the safety and integrity of this flight. You have demonstrated a failure to follow basic security protocols, including proper verification of flight crew identification. You have undermined the chain of command, which is the cornerstone of aviation safety." She took a step back from the counter, creating a space of authority around herself. A small child pointed at her, whispered something to his mother. The woman nodded, eyes fixed on Maya with something like recognition. "The culture of safety that should be this airline's highest priority has been broken before we've even left the ground. Your ground staff is refusing to follow established procedures, and your management is compounding the error rather than correcting it. I no longer have confidence in the ability of the ground crew at this station to safely prepare this aircraft for departure." Bennett's expression shifted from arrogant dismissal to confusion. "What are you talking about?" "You can't be serious," Regina muttered, but her voice had lost its certainty. Maya turned to Thomas. "First Officer Carter, are you with me on this assessment?" Thomas looked from Maya's resolute face to Bennett's confused expression. His response was immediate and unequivocal. 100%, Captain." Maya then looked back at Bennett, her voice resonating with the absolute authority granted to her under federal aviation regulations. "As the captain and final authority on all matters concerning Flight 717, I am declaring this aircraft unfit for service due to compromised pre-flight security protocols and a breakdown in crew resource management. This flight is grounded. We will not be departing today." The silence that followed was absolute. "You can't." Bennett started, then swallowed hard. "You can't do that. I assure you I can." Maya replied, her tone measured and precise. "It's called Captain's Authority, Mr. Bennett. It's codified in Federal Aviation Regulation 14, CFR 121.533, which designates the captain as having final authority and responsibility for the operation and safety of the flight." She maintained unwavering eye contact with the station manager, whose face had drained of color as the reality of the situation began to dawn on him. "My primary responsibility is the safety of my passengers and crew. That safety has been compromised by your staff's refusal to follow basic security protocols and your personal choice to escalate rather than resolve the situation." Regina looked as though she had been slapped. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. She finally seemed to understand that the woman she had dismissed wasn't just some random person, but held absolute power to shut down the very flight she was supposed to be boarding. "Wait, wait, wait!" Regina stammered, her voice suddenly high and tight. "Let's not... there's no need to... There's every need." Maya cut her off. Aviation safety isn't built on convenience. It's built on protocols and procedures that must be followed regardless of personal feelings or assumptions. You chose to ignore those protocols. This is the consequence. A murmur rippled through the crowd of passengers. Some looked confused, others angry. A few seemed oddly satisfied, as if witnessing justice being served in real time. Phones remained raised, recording everything. "She can really do that," someone whispered loudly. "Damn right she can," an older man in a pilot's cap responded. "Captain's word is law once they're assigned to a flight." Maya turned to her flight attendants, who had been watching the confrontation with increasingly alarmed expressions. "Crew, this flight is canceled. Please do not board the aircraft. Wait for official instructions from crew scheduling." Maria Rodriguez nodded wide-eyed but resolute. "Yes, Captain." Maya then pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice now clipped and official. "This is Captain Jackson. I am grounding Flight 717 at Denver Gate B48. Reason: complete breakdown of ground security protocols and improper crew verification procedures. Station manager and gate agent refused to verify my identity and prevented me from accessing the aircraft. The ground environment is hostile and incompatible with safe operations. I repeat, Flight 717 is grounded." As she spoke, chaos erupted around her. Bennett was frantically whispering into his own phone, his face contorted with panic. Regina stood frozen behind the counter, staring at the disaster she had created. Passengers were on their feet, some filming, others demanding explanations, their frustration boiling over. "What about our connections? I have a meeting in San Francisco. Is this a joke?" But amid the growing pandemonium, one passenger was behaving differently. Catherine Sullivan had completed her recording and was now making her own call. Her posture was rigid, her expression severe, and her voice, though quiet, carried the unmistakable tone of executive authority. "Alexander, it's Catherine. I need you to cancel whatever you're doing and take this call." A brief pause. "No, I'm still in Denver. In fact, I don't think I'll be leaving Denver today, and neither will anyone else from Quantum." Another pause. "Because I just witnessed something that fundamentally changes my assessment of Horizon Air as a potential partner." Maya couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see its impact on the faces of Bennett and Regina as they began to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding. This wasn't just a canceled flight. This was potentially a canceled contract, the $4.5 billion lifeline that Horizon Air was counting on for its very survival. Maria Rodriguez approached Maya with a mixture of confusion and respect. "Captain Jackson, what should we do now?" Her voice wavered slightly, but her eyes were steady, the look of someone witnessing a pivotal moment and trying to be on the right side of it. Wait for instructions from crew scheduling Maria. They'll either reassign you or release you from duty, but under no circumstances are you to board that aircraft or prepare it for departure. The flight is grounded by my authority. Maria nodded, then hesitated. Captain, I want you to know, what happened here wasn't right. If there's anything I can do. Thank you, Maya said, her professional demeanor softening slightly. Document what you witnessed. The truth matters. Maria squared her shoulders. I will. My mother always said, Si no defiendes la verdad, ¿quién lo hará? If you don't stand for truth, who will? Maya smiled slightly at that. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was a domestic worker who put me through flight attendant school. Like you, she knew about standing your ground. As Maya turned back toward the gate area, she saw that the news was spreading like wildfire. Passengers were on their phones, some rebooking on other airlines, others apparently sharing what they had just witnessed. The hashtag #Horizon711 scene would be trending within the hour. Bennett made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Captain, please, he pleaded, his voice now desperate. His earlier arrogance evaporated. Let's just talk about this. We can sort this out. A misunderstanding. Let's not do anything rash. Maya looked at him not with anger, but with a kind of detached professional disappointment. The time for talking was when I presented my credentials, Mr. Bennett. You chose to threaten me with security instead of verifying my identity. You chose to support your agent's improper actions rather than following established protocols. You made your decision. Now I've made mine. She turned to Thomas. First officer, we need to file our reports. This will trigger an automatic FAA incident review. As they walked away from the gate, leaving behind the chaos they had not created but had certainly catalyzed, Maya felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was anger at the humiliation she had endured, satisfaction at asserting her rightful authority, and concern about the professional repercussions that might follow. But overriding all of these was a sense of clarity and purpose. She had done exactly what a captain was supposed to do: prioritize safety over convenience standards, over expediency, integrity, over appeasement. Behind them, the gleaming new 737 MAX 9 sat empty at the gate, its quantum-branded livery now a painful reminder of what might have been. The engine of consequence was just beginning to turn over, and it would soon roar to life with a force that would shake Horizon Air to its foundations. The news of Flight 717's grounding didn't spread through Horizon Air's corporate channels. It exploded across them like a pipe bomb. Gate B48 had transformed from an orderly boarding area into something resembling a crisis center. Passengers crowded the counter, demanding explanations and alternatives. Phones rang incessantly. Staff who had been assigned to other gates were pulled in to help manage the chaos. And hovering over it all was the specter of the quantum executives, whose presence transformed what might have been merely a significant operational disruption into an existential corporate crisis. This is unacceptable. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit shouted at Regina, who seemed to have shrunk behind the counter. I have meetings in San Francisco. Do you have any idea who I work for? Regina's fingers trembled visibly as she typed. Sir, we're working to accommodate everyone, she responded, her voice strained and hollow. We're looking at rebooking options on other carriers. Other carriers? The man's face reddened. We're supposed to be flying on your airline. That was the whole point of this partnership. A young mother with a toddler on her hip pushed forward. So let me get this straight, she said loudly enough for others to hear. You wouldn't let the actual captain on the plane because… What? She didn't look like what you thought a captain should look like. Regina flinched. Ma'am, it was a miscommunication about— I saw what happened. The woman cut her off. We all saw it. My daughter just asked me why the lady in the pilot uniform wasn't allowed to fly the plane. What am I supposed to tell her? The little girl, maybe 3 years old, watched with wide, curious eyes. Mama, why the lady pilot sad? The moment captured perfectly what was unfolding. Not just a corporate disaster, but a human object lesson, playing out in real time, witnessed by everyone from executives to children. Catherine Sullivan stood apart from the chaos, still engaged in her phone conversation. Her voice remained measured, but her expression had transformed from controlled fury to cold analytical assessment, the look of an executive calculating losses and evaluating exit strategies. Yes, I have it all documented, she was saying. The entire interaction. No, that's the most disturbing part. They didn't even check her credentials properly. Complete security breakdown. A pause. Exactly my assessment. If this is how they handle basic protocols with their most important flight of the year, imagine what happens on regular operations. Sullivan had experienced similar situations herself throughout her career. As one of the few black women in tech leadership, she'd been mistaken for an assistant, denied entry to executive floors, and questioned about her credentials. She recognized the pattern immediately, and unlike Maya, she was in a position to deliver immediate consequences. Bennett hovered nearby, trying to appear busy while obviously straining to overhear her conversation. His phone buzzed continuously, calls from operations from corporate headquarters, from increasingly panicked supervisors, wondering why the inaugural quantum flight was showing as canceled in the system. Amidst the turmoil, different passengers were processing the event in their own ways. An elderly black woman who had witnessed the entire confrontation approached the young mother with the toddler. "You know," she said quietly, "I was 16 when they finally let black women become flight attendants. Never thought I'd live to see one as a captain. Shame they're still fighting the same battles." The mother nodded. "I'm making sure my daughter sees women in every role, even if some people aren't ready for it." Across the gate area, a group of college students had already posted their videos online, where they were accumulating views at an alarming rate. One of them had added the caption, "Horizon Air wouldn't let their black female captain on the plane. Then she shut the whole flight down. Hashtag captains matter had Horizon 7117. Dude, this is going viral," one said to his friend, watching the view count tick up. Like seriously viral. Maria Rodriguez stood with her colleagues near the jet bridge entrance, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of professional concern and personal admiration for Captain Jackson's stand. She had witnessed similar situations before, subtle and not so subtle discrimination against crew members who didn't fit the traditional pilot mold, but had never seen such a definitive response. "What happens now?" asked another flight attendant, a young white woman named Sarah. "I don't know," Maria replied honestly. "But I think everything changes after today." She glanced at her phone, where a text from her mother waited. "Mija, are you okay? Saw something about a flight canceled at Denver." How could she even begin to explain what she'd just witnessed? "I'm fine, Mama," she typed back. "Just saw something important happen. We'll call later." As if to underscore her point, a new figure strode purposefully into the gate area. Victor Ramirez, the director of Denver operations for Horizon Bennett's boss. His expression was grim, his normally affable demeanor replaced by the tight-lipped focus of an executive in crisis management mode. Bennett spotted him and visibly paled. "Victor, I can explain." Ramirez cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Not here. My office. Now." His eyes flicked to Regina. "You too, Ms. Wallace. Johnson will cover the desk." As Bennett and Regina were led away, Catherine Sullivan finally ended her call and approached the gate desk. The replacement agent, a young man who had been hastily summoned from another gate, looked terrified to see her. "Ms. Sullivan, we're so sorry for the inconvenience. We're arranging alternative transportation for you and your team immediately." Catherine regarded him with the cool assessment of a predator studying wounded prey. "That won't be necessary. I've already made other arrangements." She handed him a card. "Please ensure all Quantum personnel's luggage is removed from the aircraft and delivered to this address within the hour." "Yes, ma'am." "Of course." The agent's fingers trembled slightly as he took the card. Catherine turned to the other Quantum executives who had gathered around her. "United has space for us on their 8:30 flight. Cars are being arranged to take us to their terminal now." The message was clear to everyone within earshot. Quantum wasn't just rebooking a flight. They were rebooking a partner. Outside the terminal, Maya and Thomas sat in a quiet corner of an airport coffee shop, methodically documenting everything that had transpired. Their reports would go to the FAA, to the pilots' union, and to Horizon's Flight Operations Department. Maya's tone was professional and precise, avoiding inflammatory language, while ensuring every factual detail was recorded. "You know this is going to be a shitstorm," Thomas said quietly. Maya nodded without looking up from her tablet. "I know. No regrets." She paused, then considering the question seriously. "The only thing I regret is that it came to this. That after everything, all the training, all the protocols, all the supposed progress, we're still dealing with situations where qualified professionals are judged by how they look, rather than by their credentials and capabilities." Thomas nodded, understanding that her words encompassed something much larger than just this morning's confrontation. "For what it's worth," he said, "you did exactly what I would have expected Captain Maya Phoenix Jackson to do. You stood your ground when it mattered." A small smile touched her lips. "Thanks, Thomas. You know what's funny," he added, stirring his coffee. "I keep thinking about what my dad would say. He was a construction foreman, tough old white guy from rural Alabama. Surprised the hell out of me when I brought my black college girlfriend home and he didn't bat an eye. When I asked him about it later, he just said, 'Son, I've worked with enough people to know the color of someone's skin tells you exactly nothing about their character or capabilities.' That's always stuck with me. Your dad sounds like a wise man." He was. Would have liked you. He had no patience for fools either. As they completed their documentation, Maya's phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name that made her eyebrows rise slightly. Alexander Hawkins, CEO of Quantum Dynamics. She answered with professional composure. "This is Captain Jackson." Captain came a crisp, authoritative voice. "Alexander Hawkins, I understand you've had quite a morning." "That's one way to put it, Mr. Hawkins. Catherine Sullivan has briefed me on what transpired. I won't waste your time with platitudes about how appalled I am, though I certainly am. Instead, I'll simply say this. What you experienced today is unacceptable in any context, but particularly in an industry where precision and adherence to protocol are literally matters of life and death." Maya said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "When this situation settles, and it will settle, though perhaps not in the way Horizon might hope, I'd like to speak with you about your future plans. Talent and integrity like yours are rare commodities, Captain Jackson. Quantum values both." The implication was clear. When the dust settled from today's events, Maya would have options beyond Horizon Air. "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I appreciate the sentiment." As she ended the call, Maya looked out the airport window at the bright Colorado morning. In the distance, aircraft were taking off and landing in the choreographed precision that had drawn her to aviation since childhood. The sky was clear, unlimited, full of possibility. What she couldn't see was the corporate earthquake. Her stand had triggered a seismic event that was already sending shockwaves through boardrooms, operations centers, and stock exchanges across the country. In a sleek New York City ballroom with panoramic views of Central Park, James Morrison, the CEO of Horizon Air, was living what should have been the greatest moment of his professional life. He stood at a podium, champagne flute in hand, addressing a rapt audience of investors and financial journalists. The room buzzed with the intoxicating energy of anticipated success. And so this partnership with Quantum Dynamics represents more than just a contract, Morrison declared, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. It is a validation of our vision. It is the dawn of a new era for Horizon Air, an era of innovation, expansion, and unparalleled service. He raised his glass in a toast. Today, as Flight 717 takes to the skies from Denver, it carries more than passengers. It carries the very future of this company. Applause filled the room. Waiters circulated with trays of canapés and flutes of champagne. Morrison's phone resting on the podium had been vibrating incessantly with alerts from Denver operations, but he'd blissfully ignored them, dismissing them as minor first-day hiccups that didn't warrant interrupting his moment of triumph. As he stepped down to mingle, basking in the warm glow of congratulations, his assistant, a young woman named Emily, pushed through the crowd, her face ashen. "Mr. Morrison," she whispered urgently, "you need to take this call right now." "Emily, we're celebrating," he said with a dismissive smile. "Whatever it is can wait 15 minutes. "No, sir, it can't. It's Alexander Hawkins." Morrison's smile froze on his face. A call from Quantum's CEO during the inaugural flight celebration had to be congratulatory, didn't it? He excused himself with a confident wink to a group of investors and stepped into a quiet marble hallway, the sounds of the celebration still echoing behind him. "Alexander." He boomed into the phone, projecting an easy bonhomie he suddenly did not feel. "To what do I owe the pleasure, I trust? Our inaugural flight is meeting expectations." The voice that came back was not warm. It was a shard of ice. "Your inaugural flight, James, is a complete disaster, and your entire company is now at risk because of it." The brutal, unexpected statement hit Morrison like a physical blow. His free hand gripped the marble wall for support as the floor seemed to shift beneath him. "Alexander, what are you talking about? What's happened?" "What's happened," Hawkins said, his voice tightly controlled, "is that I have a 2-minute video courtesy of Catherine Sullivan showing your Denver staff refusing to verify the identity of the captain of our flight, a highly qualified black female pilot. They accused her of being an imposter, refused to check her federal credentials, and threatened her with security. They did this in full view of our entire executive team." Morrison's mind scrambled, grasping for a lifeline in suddenly turbulent waters. "A misunderstanding." He stammered the words, tasting like ash. "Alexander, I'm so sorry. There must have been a procedural mix-up. I'll get to the bottom of it immediately." "It's far too late for that," Hawkins cut in sharply. "Your captain has grounded the flight citing security protocol violations. My team is currently being rebooked on United, and I am invoking Section 12, Paragraph B of our agreement." Morrison felt physically ill. His legs weakened and he leaned heavily against the wall. The morals and conduct clause. His lawyers had warned him it was airtight, but he'd never imagined it would come into play, certainly not on the very first day of the partnership. "Alexander, please," Morrison begged, his voice shrinking. "Let me make this right. I'll fly to Denver myself. We can issue a formal apology, implement new training, whatever it takes." There was a chilling pause on the other end of the line. When Hawkins spoke again, his voice was dangerously soft. "The time for that was before your staff publicly humiliated a decorated pilot based on what appears to be nothing more than prejudice. What happened this morning wasn't just embarrassing, James. It was a display of exactly the kind of backward thinking that we refuse to be associated with." As of 9:05 Eastern Time, Quantum Dynamics is terminating our partnership effective immediately. Alexander. Our legal team will be in touch to handle the dissolution. Don't bother calling me back. The line went dead. Morrison stood frozen in the hallway, the silent phone still pressed to his ear. Through the glass doors, he could see the celebration continuing, investors and journalists toasting a future that had just evaporated. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne. More champagne. Sir Morrison stared at him as if he were speaking an alien language. "Get out," he whispered. Then louder, "Get out." The waiter backed away, confused and alarmed. Others in the hallway turned to stare. Within minutes, Morrison's phone began ringing again, this time with calls from Denver operations, from the board chair, from the legal department. The news was spreading, and with each passing minute, the situation grew more dire. At 9:45 a.m., the first story hit the financial wires: Horizon Air inaugural quantum flight canceled due to operational issues. On the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the ticker for Horizon Air HZN dipped a few points as traders processed what appeared to be a routine delay. But then, at 10:15 a.m., Quantum Dynamics dropped its bombshell. A terse, brutal press release sent to every major news outlet. Quantum Dynamics has terminated its partnership with Horizon Air, effective immediately due to Horizon's failure to meet contractual standards of professional conduct and operational integrity. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. On live broadcasts, financial anchors interrupted their regular programming with breaking news alerts. "We are getting some shocking news," one CNBC anchor announced, eyes widening as information came through his earpiece. Quantum has just terminated its landmark deal with Horizon Air. On screen, the stock ticker for HZN plummeted. It wasn't a dip, it was a cliff. From its morning opening price of $41.63, the stock free fell to $29.21. In minutes, triggering circuit breakers. When trading resumed, it continued its descent, touching $23.15 by noon, a 44% loss in a single day that wiped out nearly $2.7 billion in market capitalization. Back in the ballroom, Morrison's PR chief had taken the podium, her face tight with strain as she addressed the increasingly confused crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the interruption. Due to a developing situation, Mr. Morrison has been called away. We ask for your understanding as we—" She was cut off by the sound of dozens of phones buzzing and chiming simultaneously as the quantum press release hit everyone's devices at once. The room erupted into chaos as investors scrambled to contact their offices. Journalists rushed to file stories and Horizon executives huddled in panicked groups. In the Horizon Air boardroom, emergency calls were being placed to all directors. The general counsel was already reviewing the quantum contract, searching frantically for any basis to challenge the termination. The PR team was drafting statements, each version more desperate than the last. And in Denver, Maya Jackson's decision to ground one aircraft had effectively grounded the entire future of the airline. The ripple effects were expanding beyond corporate headquarters, beyond stock tickers, to the thousands of employees whose livelihoods now hung in precarious balance. But the earthquake wasn't confined to Horizon's corporate structure. It was reverberating through the aviation industry as a whole, forcing a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about culture bias and safety that many had preferred to ignore. The engine of consequence was now at full throttle, and there would be no easy way to shut it down. As videos of the confrontation at Gate B48 spread across social media platforms, 4 people in different locations were processing the events in ways that would shape the aftermath. In her modest Denver apartment, Maria Rodriguez sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. On the screen was a draft email addressed to the FAA investigation team. Subject line: Witness statement. Flight 717 incident. Her finger hovered over the send button, frozen in indecision. Outside her window, rain had begun to fall, pattering against the glass in a rhythm that matched her racing heart. On her dresser sat a framed photo of her mother in a housekeeper's uniform, standing proudly next to Maria in her brand-new flight attendant uniform. It had been taken just 3 years ago on her graduation day from training. Siempre con la verdad, mija, her mother had told her that day. Always with the truth, my daughter. As a junior flight attendant with barely 2 years at Horizon, Maria had witnessed similar incidents before the subtle and not-so-subtle ways that female pilots, especially women of color, were sometimes treated differently. She had seen passengers do double takes when spotting women in the cockpit, had overheard disparaging comments, had noticed the extra scrutiny they seemed to face. But she had never spoken up. The aviation industry operated on hierarchy and reputation. Speaking out could brand you as a troublemaker, and troublemakers didn't last long. She had student loans to pay, and her mother's medical bills to help with. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Yet what she had witnessed today went beyond the usual microaggressions. It had been a blatant public humiliation of a captain whose authority should have been absolute. Worse, it represented a fundamental breakdown in safety protocols that could have implications far beyond this single incident. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate. "Holy shit, is this your flight?" Attached was a TikTok video of the gate confrontation already at 1.2 million views. What would Captain Jackson do? She whispered to herself. The answer was clear. Maya Jackson had stood her ground, despite the professional risks. She had chosen integrity over expediency. Maria looked at her mother's photo once more, drew a deep breath, and pressed send. Then she drafted a second email to her union representative, detailing everything she had witnessed. Whatever happened next, she would know she had done the right thing. Across town, in an elegant high-rise condo, Maya Jackson sat in near darkness, the blinds drawn against the bright Colorado day. Her phone had been ringing constantly, calls from fellow pilots from the union, from journalists who had somehow obtained her number. She had answered only two, her mother and her longtime mentor, Dr. Sofia Vasquez, a former Air Force colonel who had guided Maya's career from the academy onward. "You did exactly what you should have done," Dr. Vasquez had assured her. "This isn't just about discrimination, Maya. This is about aviation safety. When ground personnel refuse to follow basic security protocols, they create vulnerabilities that affect everyone." Now alone with her thoughts, Maya felt the weight of the day's events settling over her. She had never sought to be a symbol or a hashtag. She had simply wanted to fly aircraft to command the sky with the same authority as any other qualified pilot. Yet now, because of one gate agent's prejudice and one manager's arrogance, she had become the center of a storm that was already reshaping the landscape of commercial aviation. She opened her laptop, wincing at the flood of notifications. Captain Jackson was trending nationwide. Someone had already created a meme of her walking away from the gate, overlaid with the caption, "I don't always ground flights, but when I do, I ground entire airlines." It had been shared over 50,000 times. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. The sudden attention made her deeply uncomfortable. She was a pilot, not a civil rights icon. She hadn't asked for this spotlight, and she certainly didn't want to become the face of a movement. All she'd wanted was to do her job. Her phone pinged with a news alert. Horizon Air stock halted after 28% plunge following quantum contract termination. The ripple effects of her decision were already far larger than she had anticipated. Thousands of jobs, including those of crew members who had done nothing wrong, were now at risk. She felt a complex mixture of vindication and regret. Not regret for her decision that had been necessary and correct, but regret that it had come to this. That after decades of supposed progress, after countless diversity initiatives and inclusion training sessions, the fundamental respect due to a qualified professional could still be withheld based on appearance. She picked up her grandmother's pendant, rubbing the worn silver between her fingers. "I didn't back down, Grandma," she whispered. "Just like you taught me." In a downtown Denver hotel room, William Bennett sat with his head in his hands. His desk phone had been disconnected. His company cell phone had been remotely wiped. His employee access badge had been deactivated. 23 years at Horizon Air ended with a 2-minute call from Victor Ramirez. "The board has approved your immediate termination. HR will contact you about severance details. Please do not return to airport property." The television in the corner blared with a local news anchor's voice. "Shocking incident at Denver International Airport this morning, where a black female pilot was allegedly denied access to her own aircraft by Horizon Air staff. The captain, identified as Maya Jackson, subsequently grounded the flight, citing safety concerns." Bennett had tried to explain to justify his actions as standard procedure in a security situation. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they sounded. The truth, the uncomfortable, unexamined truth, was that he had made a snap judgment based on appearance. He had seen a black woman claiming authority and had instinctively sided with the employee who questioned that authority. Now, as he scrolled through the avalanche of social media posts about the incident, he saw himself through others' eyes, not as a diligent manager protecting his airline, but as the embodiment of an institutional bias that had finally catastrophically been exposed. On the bedside table sat a framed photo of his daughter's graduation from law school last year. She'd been so proud that day, talking about her plans to work in civil rights law. What would she think when she saw the videos? Would she even recognize her father in that dismissive, condescending man? His phone rang, his personal cell, one of the few numbers that still worked. It was Regina Wallace, the gate agent. "They fired me," she said without preamble, her voice hollow. No warning, no chance to explain, just escorted me out like a criminal. Bennett wasn't surprised. "Me too. What do we do now?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Bill, I've been in aviation my whole adult life. I don't know how to do anything else." It was a question without an easy answer. The videos had their names, their faces. They had become instant symbols of discrimination in an industry struggling to modernize its culture. Their aviation careers were effectively over. "I don't know," Bennett admitted. "I honestly don't know." After a moment of silence, Regina spoke again, her voice small. "Do you think we were wrong? I mean, I really thought she was trying to... I don't know. I just didn't think she could be the captain." Bennett finished for her. "Yeah. That's the problem, Regina. We didn't think she could be the captain. And we were dead wrong." In a spacious office overlooking San Francisco Bay, Alexander Hawkins was reviewing the video that Catherine Sullivan had sent him. He had watched it 5 times now, each viewing reinforcing his decision to terminate the contract with Horizon. Hawkins had built quantum dynamics on 2 foundational principles: technological innovation and human dignity. The latter wasn't just a feel-good corporate value, it was a business imperative. His company recruited the best minds from around the world, people of all backgrounds, ethnicities, and orientations. A partner that embodied the kind of bias he had just witnessed was not merely offensive, it was fundamentally incompatible with Quantum's operational model. The door opened, and his chief counsel, David Lynn, entered with a tablet in hand. "The termination paperwork is ready," Lynn said, "and I've reviewed the contract thoroughly. Section 12, paragraph B, gives us clear legal standing. If they challenge it, we have the video evidence to support our position." Hawkins nodded. "And the PR statement, released 20 minutes ago. The markets are already responding. What about Captain Jackson? Lynn hesitated. We've obtained her contact information. She has an exemplary record. Air Force Academy graduate, decorated military service, one of the highest-rated commercial pilots in the country. Would you like me to reach out to her? Hawkins considered the question carefully. Not yet. Let the immediate situation stabilize. But keep her file accessible. Someone with her qualifications and integrity shouldn't be collateral damage in this mess. As he gazed out at the bay, Hawkins reflected on a memory from his own early career, being consistently mistaken for an IT support technician. Rather than the software architect, he was simply because of his appearance. It had been frustrating, demeaning, but it had never put lives at risk the way today's incident potentially had. One more thing, he said to Lynn. I want to understand how widespread this problem is in the aviation industry. Get me data on discrimination incidents reported by minority pilots over the last 5 years, and set up a meeting with our travel department. I want to know what safeguards other airlines have in place to prevent this kind of security breakdown. As these 4 individuals grappled with the personal implications of the morning's events, the story was exploding across traditional and social media. Hashtag Horizon717 and hashtag Captain Jackson were trending nationally. Aviation forums were flooded with pilots sharing similar experiences. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. The FAA had announced a formal investigation into the security protocol breach. What had begun as one woman's stand for her professional dignity had transformed into a national conversation about bias, safety, and accountability in one of the world's most highly regulated industries. And that conversation was just beginning. 3 days after the incident at Gate B-48, Regina Wallace sat in a sterile conference room on the administrative side of Denver International Airport. Across from her were 2 stone-faced individuals, a senior HR executive from Horizon Air corporate headquarters, and a man in an expensive suit whose business card identified him as outside counsel for the airline. This wasn't a discussion or a hearing. It was the formal documentation of a termination that had already been executed. Regina's security access had been revoked within hours of the incident. Her locker had been emptied, its contents placed in a cardboard box that now sat at her feet. This meeting was merely the corporate equivalent of a funeral, the official burial of a career that had spanned 12 years. Ms. Wallace, the HR executive, began her voice, clinically detached. I want to ensure that you understand the reasons for your termination. Regina nodded numbly. She had barely slept in 3 days. The social media firestorm had found her quickly. Her name, her face, her home address. She'd had to disconnect her phone after the 5th death threat. The lawyer opened a laptop and turned it to face her. Before we proceed, I need to confirm that you recognize yourself in this video. The screen showed Gate B-48 from the perspective of a passenger's phone. Regina watched herself, a stranger in her own uniform, interacting with Captain Jackson. She saw the dismissive wave of her hand, heard her own voice saying, "You'll need to wait outside with the other passengers." She watched herself push the captain's credentials back across the counter without properly examining them, saw her own smirk as she challenged a decorated pilot. The Regina on screen didn't look like a professional performing her duties. She looked like exactly what she had been in that moment, a petty tyrant wielding the smallest measure of authority to diminish someone she perceived as not belonging. It was as if she were watching a character in a film, a character written to be disliked. "That's me," she confirmed, her voice barely audible. The HR executive nodded. "Your actions represent a catastrophic failure to adhere to federally mandated security protocols, a gross violation of company policy, and have resulted in irreparable financial and reputational damage to this airline." The lawyer slid a document across the table. "This termination letter outlines the specific policies you violated. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address of record. You will not receive severance pay due to the nature of your termination for cause." Regina stared at the termination letter, the black ink blurring through a film of hot, angry tears. It wasn't fair. It was one mistake, one bad morning. How could a single incident erase 12 years of service? I've been with this company for 12 years, she said, her voice cracking. One mistake and it's over. Just like that. The HR executive's expression softened fractionally, the first hint of humanity in the proceedings. "Ms. Wallace, this wasn't just a mistake. It was a catastrophic error in judgment that violated multiple safety protocols and federal regulations. It has cost this company billions in market value and potentially its very existence. But I didn't know she was really the captain I thought." "That is precisely the problem," the lawyer interjected. "You didn't know yet. You acted as if you did. Rather than following proper credential verification procedures, you made an assumption and then doubled down on it when challenged. In aviation, assumptions kill people. That's why we have protocols." Regina fell silent. She had no defense, no explanation that wouldn't make things worse. The truth, the ugly, uncomfortable truth she wasn't ready to face, even now, was that she had seen a black woman in a captain's uniform and had automatically assumed it couldn't be right. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. "I've been in aviation my whole adult life." The HR executive's expression didn't change. "That's not Horizon Air's concern, Ms. Wallace. You should have considered the consequences before failing to follow basic security protocols." As security escorted her through a back exit, Regina caught a glimpse of a news monitor in the terminal. Her own face, a still from the viral video, was plastered across the screen, alongside a headline: "Horizon Gate Agent Fired After Discrimination Incident. Tanks. Airline Stock." She wasn't just unemployed. She was infamous. Outside in the parking lot, rain fell in heavy sheets. Regina stood clutching her cardboard box suddenly, without the protection of the employee umbrella stand. Her car was parked in the far corner of the lot, a 15-minute walk through the downpour. As the water soaked through her clothes, she thought about Captain Jackson standing her ground at the gate, dignity intact, despite everything Regina had done to diminish her. For the first time, Regina felt something beyond self-pity, shame. William Bennett's fall was both quieter and more devastating. His termination had been executed with the ruthless efficiency reserved for high-level management, whose failures threatened the company itself. He had barricaded himself in his office after the incident, frantically making calls, trying to perform the managerial alchemy of transforming a catastrophe into a learning opportunity. He was still operating under the delusion that this could be contained, managed, spun. He had left a dozen groveling voicemails for CEO James Morrison, drafted memos defending his actions as standard procedure in a potential security situation, and tried to rally his staff to present a unified front. His world collapsed, not with a confrontation, but with a single email that landed in his inbox with the finality of a guillotine. The subject line was stark: termination of employment. It was from the executive VP of operations, his boss's boss. It was 3 sentences long. It stated that his staggering lack of judgment had directly led to the single greatest disaster in the company's history, and that his services were no longer required. His network access, it informed him, would be revoked in 60 seconds. He sat there staring at the screen as his email program disconnected. His corporate phone went dead. His digital identity as a manager erased. For 23 years, Horizon Air had been his life. His authority, his identity was tied up in his title, in the uniform he no longer wore, in the power he wielded over the Denver station. In his arrogance, he had seen Captain Jackson not as the commander of a billion-dollar asset, but as a problem to be swatted away. He had gambled that his authority outranked her reality. and he had lost everything. 5 days after the incident, Bennett sat in his attorney's office, listening to a brutally honest assessment of his legal options. "The reality, Mr. Bennett, is that we have very little leverage here," the lawyer explained. "The video evidence is damning. You clearly violated company policy regarding crew identification verification. You threatened a captain with security removal for attempting to access her own aircraft. From a legal standpoint, Horizon's termination for cause is virtually unassailable." "What about wrongful termination?" Bennett asked desperately. "I was following what I believed were proper security protocols." The lawyer's expression was pitying. "No court would accept that. The protocols for crew identification are explicit, and you didn't follow them. More to the point, do you really want to pursue litigation that would involve that video being played in open court? That would only prolong your public exposure." Bennett slumped in his chair. "So I just accept this. 23 years ended because of one mistake. It wasn't just a mistake, Mr. Bennett. It was a judgment failure that cost your company a $4.5 billion contract and tanked their stock by more than 40%. In the corporate world, that's not a mistake. It's a catastrophe." The brutal assessment hung in the air. Bennett knew it was true. He had been watching the financial news coverage with a kind of horrified fascination. Horizon Air was in freefall. Emergency board meetings, shareholder lawsuits, credit rating downgrades, and all of it traced back to his decision to support Regina Wallace rather than verify Captain Jackson's credentials. His phone vibrated with a text. It was from his daughter Emma, a civil rights attorney with the ACLU. "Dad, call me when you can. I saw the videos. We need to talk." The message landed like a physical blow. Emma, whose childhood bedroom had been decorated with Amelia Earhart posters. Emma, who had dragged him to see Hidden Figures 3 times. Emma, who had chosen her career path after witnessing a housing discrimination case in their own neighborhood. What could he possibly say to her? How could he explain a failure so fundamental that it called into question not just his professional judgment, but his character? "What do I do now?" He asked the question, revealing the hollowness that had opened inside him. The lawyer closed his file. "Practically speaking, take whatever severance they offer. Sign the non-disclosure agreement. Move away from Denver. The aviation community here will never hire you. Consider a career change. And Mr. Bennett," he added, his tone softening slightly, "consider some self-reflection about why you reacted the way you did to Captain Jackson. That might be the most valuable work you could do right now." As Bennett left the office, he felt the weight of not just his lost career, but of a painful truth he was only beginning to acknowledge. His snap judgment, the instinctive decision to question the authority of a black woman, rather than verify her credentials, hadn't come from nowhere. It had come from biases so deeply ingrained that he hadn't even recognized them until they destroyed everything he had worked for. That evening, he finally gathered the courage to call his daughter. "Hi, Dad." Emma answered, her voice carefully neutral. "Emma," he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "I messed up. Badly." "I saw," she said simply. "Why, Dad? Why didn't you just check her ID?" The question was so direct, so fundamental, that Bennett had no prepared defense. "I don't know," he admitted. I saw her, and I didn't think she could be the captain. It wasn't conscious. It was instinct. That's what we call implicit bias, Dad. It's what I fight against every day in my work." "I know that now," he said quietly. "I just never thought I was that kind of person." "Most people don't," Emma replied. "That's what makes it so insidious." There was a long pause. Then Emma spoke again, her voice softer. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know yet. The lawyer says my aviation career is over. Maybe that's not the only thing that needs to change. For both Regina Wallace and William Bennett, the consequences of that morning at Gate B-48 were immediate and devastating. Their aviation careers were over. Their professional reputations were in tatters. Their faces had become symbols of a bias that the industry could no longer ignore or excuse. But as painful as their personal reckonings were, they represented only the first ripples in a wave of consequences that was still building strength, a wave that would eventually crash over not just Horizon Air, but the entire aviation industry. The boardroom of Horizon Air's New York headquarters had transformed from a place of strategic planning into a crisis command center. The long mahogany table was littered with half-empty coffee cups, discarded printouts of financial projections, and tablets displaying the ever-worsening stock ticker. James Morrison, CEO, and now the public face of a corporate implosion, looked like he had aged a decade in a week. His tie was loosened, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, his normally confident posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man bracing for the next blow. The latest from the markets, he asked, his voice hoarse. The CFO, Patricia Alvarez, glanced at her tablet with a grimace. Down another 12% today to $19.87. That brings our total loss to 52% since the incident. We've wiped out over $3.1 billion in market cap in 7 days. The credit agencies Morrison pressed, though he already knew the answer. Moody's and S&P have both downgraded us to junk status. Alvarez confirmed. That triggers the covenants on our existing debt. The banks are calling this afternoon to discuss terms, which means they'll demand accelerated repayment or additional collateral. Morrison translated. Collateral we don't have. A young analyst near the end of the table raised her hand tentatively. Sir, there's something else you should see. She tapped her tablet, and the large screen at the end of the room lit up with a social media post. It was from a passenger who had been on a different Horizon flight the day after the incident. The post showed a black female passenger being questioned about her first-class ticket by a flight attendant. The caption read, "Day after hashtag Captain Jackson incident, and at Horizon Air, still hasn't gotten the message. This woman showed her boarding pass 3 times, and they're still questioning her right to be in first class." Cat boycott. Horizon. The post had 2.3 million views. Jesus Christ, Morrison muttered. Is this verified? It's real. The analyst confirmed. The passenger has been interviewed by 3 news outlets already. Our social media team tried to reach out, but she's not responding. The general counsel, Howard Green, cleared his throat. That's not our only problem. We've received formal notice from 3 major shareholders that they're preparing derivative lawsuits. They're alleging that management failed to implement proper training and oversight, creating the conditions that led to the quantum contract termination. Can we fight it? Morrison asked. Green's expression was grim. Not successfully. The video evidence is too compelling, and the financial damage is quantifiable. Our D&O insurance will cover some of it, but not all. The VP of Operations, Marcus Thompson, added his own dire update. We're seeing mass cancellations across our network. Load factors are down 30% system-wide. Corporate travel departments are advising their employees to book away from us. The quantum incident is all anyone is talking about. And the pilots, Morrison asked. Thompson's expression darkened further. The union is publicly supporting Captain Jackson. They've issued a statement calling her actions consistent with the highest standards of aviation safety and professional integrity. They're also demanding a complete overhaul of our crew identification procedures and implicit bias training for all ground staff. And Captain Jackson herself. Have we reached out to her? The head of HR. Janet Miller shifted uncomfortably. We sent a formal apology letter from the company and placed her on administrative leave with pay pending the FAA investigation. She hasn't responded directly, but her attorney has informed us that she's cooperating fully with the FAA review. Is there any chance she'd come back? Make a statement supporting the airline. Miller's expression made it clear how unlikely that scenario was. Sir, we publicly humiliated her, then immediately removed her from flight status while we investigated. Would you come back after that? The stark assessment hung in the air. Horizon Air, once a promising mid-tier carrier with ambitions of joining the industry's elite ranks, was now in an existential crisis. The quantum contract had been their lifeline, their path to stability and growth. Without it, they were just another struggling airline with aging aircraft, high debt, and now a radioactive public image. What are our options? Morrison asked, looking around the table for any sign of hope. Marcus Thompson spoke first. Operationally, we need to reduce capacity immediately. Ground the older aircraft, cut unprofitable routes, possibly furlough staff. It's drastic, but we need to preserve cash. That will trigger union problems, Green warned. Better than bankruptcy, Thompson countered. Patricia Alvarez nodded in agreement. We need to approach our creditors with a restructuring plan before they force one on us. If we can demonstrate a clear path to stabilization, they might give us breathing room. In the middle of this grim assessment, the door opened and Morrison's assistant entered, her face pale. Sir, the board chair is on line 1. He says it's urgent. Morrison excused himself and took the call in his private office. The conversation was brief and one-sided. When he returned to the boardroom, his face was ashen. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning, he announced. They're flying in for it. No one needed to spell out what that meant. When boards flew in for emergency meetings during a crisis, CEO changes typically followed. As the grim assessment continued in the boardroom, the meltdown was spreading throughout the company. In crew lounges across the country, Horizon pilots and flight attendants were gathered around television screens, watching their company's public immolation with a mixture of horror and anger. They're saying we might have to take pay cuts to keep the airline afloat, a senior captain in Chicago reported to his colleagues, after they just spent millions on those new planes for the quantum routes. My daughter's friends won't even talk to her at school because her mom works for that racist airline, a flight attendant in Los Angeles shared. How did we become the villains here? In Denver, at the epicenter of the crisis, morale had collapsed entirely. The staff who had worked alongside Regina and Bennett were shell-shocked, simultaneously processing the loss of colleagues and facing the judgment of passengers who recognized their uniforms. I had a passenger ask me today if I was going to let her on the plane since she's black, a gate agent confided to a colleague. What do you even say to that? At the corporate headquarters in New York, mid-level managers were updating their resumes and making discreet calls to contacts at other airlines. Administrative staff were whispering about whether paychecks would clear. The once confident corporate culture had been replaced by a miasma of fear and uncertainty. In the break room, a small group of employees had gathered around a phone, displaying a new viral video. It showed a black female pilot from United Airlines being greeted with a standing ovation from passengers as she boarded her aircraft. The caption read, "This is what respect looks like. That could have been us," someone murmured. That should have been us. Morrison's fears about the emergency board meeting proved prescient. At 9:00 a.m., the following day after a 3-hour closed-door session, the board emerged with a press release announcing his resignation, effective immediately. Patricia Alvarez was named interim CEO, tasked with stabilizing the airline, while a search for permanent leadership was conducted. The press statement included a paragraph that had clearly been crafted by crisis management consultants. Horizon Air acknowledges that the events at Denver International Airport reflected significant failures in our training protocols and culture. We are committed to addressing these failures at every level of our organization. We have terminated the employees directly involved and are implementing comprehensive changes to ensure such incidents never occur again. The carefully worded statement did nothing to stem the bleeding. By the end of the second week following the incident, Horizon Air's stock had stabilized around $17.50, a 58% loss from its pre-incident high of $41.63. Credit markets were effectively closed to them. Suppliers were demanding cash on delivery. Partner airlines were distancing themselves, unwilling to allow the taint of the scandal to spread to their brands. What had begun as a confrontation at a single gate had metastasized into a corporate collapse of breathtaking speed and scope. And as Horizon Air fought for its very survival, the ripples continued to spread outward, touching not just one airline, but an entire industry that could no longer ignore its uncomfortable truths. The first sign that the Horizon Air incident would have industry-wide implications came when Delta Airlines announced just 10 days after the viral video a comprehensive review of its crew identification protocols. Within 48 hours, United American and Southwest had made similar announcements. It wasn't coincidence. It was self-preservation. In the executive offices of every major carrier, the same conversation was taking place. Could this happen here? The universal answer was an uncomfortable yes. Every airline had its Regina Wallace's and William Bennett's staff, whose unexamined biases represented ticking time bombs in an era of ubiquitous cameras and instantaneous social media. The rapid response wasn't just about optics. It was driven by cold financial calculation. Airline executives had watched in horror as Horizon's stock collapsed, as its corporate partners fled, as its brand became toxic overnight. None of them wanted to be the next cautionary tale. At United's headquarters in Chicago, a task force was quickly assembled to develop what would eventually become known as the Jackson Protocol, a standardized procedure for crew identification that removed subjective judgment from the process. The protocol required gate agents to scan crew credentials electronically, with the system automatically cross-referencing the ID against the crew manifest. No scan, no access regardless of rank, appearance, or familiarity. This isn't just about avoiding a PR disaster, United's chief operating officer explained to her team. This is about fixing a legitimate security vulnerability. If ground staff can deny access to the actual captain based on how they look, we have a fundamental breakdown in our operational procedures. American Airlines went a step further, implementing mandatory quarterly training on conscious and unconscious bias for all customer-facing staff. The training used the Horizon incident as a case study, forcing employees to confront the potential consequences of allowing personal biases to override professional protocols. In a Dallas simulator facility, a diverse group of American Airlines pilots, including several women of color, were invited to share their experiences with new hire gate agents as part of this training. I've been asked to prove I'm the pilot at least once a month for my entire career, one black female captain told the group. Every time I have to decide, do I make a scene and risk being labeled difficult, or do I swallow my pride and prove myself yet again? Captain Jackson chose a third option, and we should all thank her for it. The Federal Aviation Administration, facing pressure from both industry groups and civil rights organizations, launched a formal investigation into the security breakdown at Gate B48. The preliminary findings, released 3 weeks after the incident, were damning. A fundamental failure to follow established security protocols, exacerbated by a management response that compounded rather than corrected the initial error. The report recommended industry-wide reforms in crew identification procedures and suggested that airlines integrate bias awareness into their mandatory safety training programs, effectively elevating the issue from a soft HR concern to a critical safety protocol. What the Horizon incident demonstrated, the FAA administrator testified before a congressional committee, is that bias isn't just a social justice issue. In safety-critical environments, like aviation, it can directly impact operational security and procedural compliance. That makes it an FAA regulatory concern. Not all pilots were in agreement about Captain Jackson's actions, however. In online forums and crew lounges, a small but vocal minority questioned her decision to ground the flight. She had every right to be angry about how she was treated, wrote one senior captain from a major carrier in an industry blog. But did she need to cancel the entire flight? Couldn't she have filed a complaint and still operated the service? I'm not sure punishing 150 passengers was the proportional response. The debate sparked heated exchanges with supporters, pointing out that the security breakdown wasn't a trivial slight, but a serious operational concern that justified her decision under FAA regulations. It wasn't about her feelings countered another pilot. It was about a gate agent and manager refusing to follow federal security protocols. If they're willing to ignore those what other safety procedures are, they bypassing. Captain Jackson made the only call that maintained the integrity of the system. Aviation industry publications, which typically focused on technical and operational matters, now featured articles with titles like "The Hidden Costs of Bias and Diversity as a Safety Imperative." Industry conferences hastily added panels on inclusive leadership and bias-free operations. At the annual Aviation Safety Summit in Atlanta, a session titled "The Jackson Effect," when bias overrides protocol, had to be moved to the main ballroom to accommodate the overflow crowd. The panel featured safety experts, airline executives, and most compelling, a group of minority pilots sharing their experiences with credential challenges and authority questions. I've had passengers request a different pilot when they saw me during boarding, shared a Latina captain from a major carrier. I've had ground staff address questions to my white male first officer, even when I'm the one wearing captain's stripes. But the scariest part isn't the personal slight. It's what it represents about how deeply ingrained these assumptions are and how they can override safety protocols. On major news networks, aviation analysts who normally discussed route strategies and fuel costs were now examining the industry's culture through a more critical lens. What the Horizon incident explained a former FAA administrator on CNN, is that aviation safety isn't just about mechanical systems and operational procedures. It's about human factors, including the biases that can lead people to override established protocols based on appearances or assumptions. On MSNBC, a panel of industry experts discussed the financial implications. "What we're seeing is the market pricing in a new risk factor," said a prominent Wall Street analyst. Investors are now looking at airlines' diversity metrics and bias training as material information, not just feel-good corporate messaging. In Denver, at a local coffee shop near the airport, a group of pilots from different airlines sat discussing the changes they were already seeing. My chief pilot called me personally to check if I'd ever experienced anything like what happened to Captain Jackson, said a black male captain from United. First time in 15 years he's ever asked. My airline just implemented a new electronic ID verification system, added an Asian American female first officer. Every crew member gets scanned, no exceptions, no matter how well the gate agent knows you. They're calling it the Jackson scanner, unofficially. It shouldn't have taken this, said another pilot quietly. How many of us have been dealing with this for years? How many reports disappeared into HR black holes? It took a viral video and a company collapse to make them listen. Civil rights organizations seized the moment to push for broader reforms. The NAACP issued a travel advisory concerning Horizon Air specifically, but also called for transparent reporting on discrimination incidents across all carriers. The National Organization for Women highlighted the persistent gender gap in commercial aviation, particularly in leadership roles. The pilots' union typically focused on compensation, and Working Conditions released a strongly worded statement supporting Captain Jackson and calling for industry-wide reforms in how airlines addressed bias and discrimination. The safety and authority of every pilot is undermined when any pilot's credentials and qualifications are questioned based on their appearance rather than their capabilities. The statement read, "What happened to Captain Jackson could have happened to any pilot who doesn't fit the traditional mold, and that represents an unacceptable safety risk to our entire profession." For minority pilots across the industry, the incident had struck a painfully familiar chord. Many came forward with their own stories of being questioned, doubted, or mistaken for cabin crew, despite their uniforms and credentials. The only difference between what happened to Captain Jackson and what happens to many of us regularly, said one black female pilot from a major carrier, is that hers was caught on video and had immediate financial consequences for the airline. The rest of us just absorb these indignities and keep flying. Perhaps the most significant industry-wide change came in the form of a technological innovation. A startup founded by former airline security personnel developed an app called Crew Verify that allowed pilots and flight attendants to pre-authenticate their identity and assignment before arriving at the airport. The app generated a unique QR code that gate agents could scan, eliminating the subjective element of crew verification entirely. Within 6 months of the Horizon incident, the app had been adopted by 6 major carriers and was being tested by a dozen more. Industry observers noted the irony it had taken a viral video of discrimination to solve a security vulnerability that had existed for decades. As these changes rippled through the industry, Horizon Air struggled to find its footing. Interim CEO Patricia Alvarez had implemented drastic cost-cutting measures, grounding older aircraft, suspending routes, offering voluntary furloughs. The airline had narrowly avoided bankruptcy through a combination of asset sales and renegotiated debt terms, but its long-term viability remained in question. The Quantum contract, the lifeline that was supposed to secure Horizon's future, had been officially terminated with a settlement agreement that allowed the airline to avoid a protracted legal battle, but required it to pay significant damages. For the aviation industry as a whole, the Horizon incident had forced a long overdue reckoning with issues of bias and inclusion that had been relegated to corporate mission statements rather than operational priorities. What began as one pilot's stand for professional dignity had catalyzed changes that would affect every aspect of how airlines hired, trained, and operated. And at the center of this transformation was Captain Maya Jackson, whose life and career had been irrevocably altered by a confrontation she had never sought, but had faced with the same steady resolve that had defined her time in the cockpit. The relentless ringing of the doorbell forced Maya to abandon the sanctuary of her home office. Through the peephole, she could see a cluster of reporters on her front porch, cameras and microphones at the ready. This had become her new normal in the 3 weeks since the incident, a constant siege of media attention she neither wanted nor welcomed. Captain Jackson, just a few questions, Maya. Can we get your reaction to Horizon's stock collapse? What do you think about being called a hero by the pilots' union? She stepped away from the door without opening it, returning to the quiet of her office, where the blinds remained drawn against both the Colorado sunshine and the telephoto lenses that occasionally appeared across the street. Her phone displayed 27 missed calls, 45 text messages, and over 100 emails, a digital barrage that had barely slowed since the video went viral. She had stopped answering unknown numbers days ago, responding only to close friends, family, and her legal representation. The pilots' union had quickly arranged for an attorney to represent her interests, both in the FAA investigation and in her dealings with Horizon Air. The lawyer, a former pilot himself, had given her clear advice document, everything, say nothing publicly, and wait for the investigations to conclude before making any decisions about her future. It was sound counsel, but it left Maya in a strange limbo. She was technically still employed by Horizon on administrative leave with pay, but she had no idea if or when she would fly for them again. The airline was in free fall, its future uncertain, its reputation in tatters. Even if she wanted to return a prospect that grew less appealing by the day, there might not be an airline to return to. Her laptop chimed with an incoming video call from her mother, Dr. Elaine Jackson, a retired history professor whose quiet strength had guided Maya throughout her life. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Elaine asked, as soon as the connection stabilized her concern, evident even through the pixelated image. "I'm managing," Maya replied, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The reporters are still camped outside, but they'll lose interest eventually." "And how are you really?" her mother pressed, seeing through the brave front. Maya sighed, allowing her carefully maintained composure to slip just slightly. "Honestly, I'm exhausted. Not physically, I'm sleeping more than I have in years. But emotionally, I never wanted any of this, Mom. I just wanted to fly my plane. I know, baby. But sometimes history puts us in positions we didn't ask for. What matters is how we handle it." Maya glanced at a framed photo on her desk herself at age 8, sitting in the cockpit of a small plane during an air show, beaming with pure joy. Beside it sat a newer photo, Maya in her Air Force dress uniform, receiving her wings. "That's just it," she said, frustration seeping into her voice. "I don't know how I'm supposed to handle this. Everyone wants something from me now. The civil rights organizations want me to be their spokesperson. The media wants an exclusive interview. The internet has turned me into some kind of symbol. I'm getting messages from young black girls saying I'm their hero. Me for simply insisting on doing the job I was trained to do. And is that such a bad thing?" Elaine asked gently. "Those girls need heroes who look like them. When I was their age, I had you, Mom." Elaine smiled. And look how well that turned out. But not every girl has a mother who stormed a university administration building demanding equal access to the physics lab. The reference to her mother's own activism in the 1970s made Maya smile despite herself. Elaine Jackson had been a force of nature fighting for her place in academia when few black women were welcomed there. She had raised Maya alone after Maya's father died, when she was just 4, instilling in her both a fierce independence and an uncompromising sense of justice. "I'm not an activist, Mom. I'm a pilot. Baby, you became an activist the moment you refused to accept being diminished. That's how change happens, not through grand gestures, but through individual moments of courage." After ending the call with her mother, Maya checked her secure email account, the one only a handful of people had access to. Among the messages was one from another, black female pilot, a captain with a major carrier whom Maya had met at industry events over the years. "I just wanted to say thank you," the message read. "What happened to you has happened to many of us in different forms, but you're the one who finally made it impossible to ignore. I've been questioned, mistaken for cabin crew, had passengers ask for the real pilot when they saw me in the cockpit. We all have stories, but now because of you, people are finally listening to them. Whatever you decide to do next, know that you've already changed things for the better." Attached to the email was a photo of the pilot with her all-female flight crew, each giving a thumbs up. The caption read, "The next generation says thank you, Captain Jackson." The message touched Maya deeply, reminding her that her individual experience was part of a larger pattern, one that affected countless professionals who didn't conform to traditional expectations of what authority should look like. Her contemplation was interrupted by a call from Dr. Sofia Vasquez, her longtime mentor. Unlike the barrage of unwanted contacts, Sofia's calls were always welcome. The former Air Force colonel had guided Maya's career from her earliest days at the academy, offering the perfect blend of tough love and unwavering support. "Have you seen the latest?" Sophia asked without preamble. "I'm trying to avoid the news," Maya admitted. "Well, you might want to make an exception for this. The FAA just released their preliminary findings. They're backing you completely, Maya." The report specifically cites the failure of Horizon Air ground personnel to follow established security protocols and the inappropriate escalation by management rather than verification of crew credentials. Maya felt a weight lift slightly from her shoulders. The official validation mattered, even if it couldn't undo the personal toll of the past weeks. "There's more," Sophia continued. "They're recommending industry-wide reforms in crew identification procedures. They're calling it the Jackson Protocol." Maya was momentarily speechless. "They're naming it after me. Not officially, but that's what everyone is calling it. 6 airlines have already announced they're implementing new electronic verification systems." "You've started something important, Maya." "I never intended to start anything," Maya said softly. "I just wanted to do my job. Intentional or not, you've created change. And that change will protect other pilots who might have faced the same situation but lacked the courage or authority to stand their ground." After the call ended, Maya sat in silence, processing the implications. When she had made her decision to ground Flight 717, she had been thinking about immediate safety concerns and her own professional dignity. She hadn't considered the possibility that her stand would catalyze industry-wide reforms. As she walked into her kitchen to make tea, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, the same face, but carrying a new weight of responsibility she hadn't asked for and wasn't sure she wanted. She'd received invitations to speak at conferences, offers for book deals, even a preliminary call from a Hollywood producer interested in her life rights. The attention was overwhelming, almost suffocating. This wasn't what she had trained for, wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself. She was a pilot, not a public figure. The cockpit was her natural habitat, not the spotlight. "This will pass," she told herself firmly. "This will pass, and I'll fly again." Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Carter United. "Just called me. They're looking for experienced 737 check airmen. Mentioned they'd be interested in talking to you too when you're ready. No pressure, just passing along the info." The message hinted at what Maya already suspected: her career wouldn't end with Horizon Air. Her skills, experience, and now her principled stand had made her valuable to other carriers, perhaps even more valuable than before. She walked to her window and carefully pulled back the edge of the blinds. The reporters were still there, but their numbers had dwindled. Soon enough, the news cycle would move on. The viral moment would fade. But the changes she had inadvertently sparked would continue to ripple outward. Maya touched her grandmother's silver pendant, a habit from childhood, when she needed strength. "The sky has no color lines," she whispered to herself. "Remember that when the ground tries to hold you back." As the afternoon faded into evening, Maya finally ventured onto her back patio, seeking fresh air and a momentary escape from the cocoon she'd created inside. The media stakeout at the front of her house couldn't see this private space, allowing her a rare moment of outdoor peace. The sky above was painted in the spectacular oranges and purples of a Colorado sunset. Looking up at that limitless expanse, Maya felt a familiar sense of belonging. The sky had been her home for most of her adult life, the one place where her authority was rarely questioned, where her skill and judgment were. What mattered not her appearance. She would fly again. Of that she was certain. The only questions were when, where, and how she would use this unexpected platform she had been given. As if in answer to her unspoken thoughts, her phone buzzed with an email from Alexander Hawkins, CEO of Quantum Dynamics, Captain Jackson. "When the dust settles from recent events, and it will settle, I would welcome the opportunity to discuss your future plans. Quantum is establishing a corporate flight department, and we need leadership that embodies both technical excellence and uncompromising integrity. Your demonstration of both has not gone unnoticed. No need to respond immediately. This door remains open when you're ready. Regards, Alexander Hawkins. Maya looked from the email back to the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. For the first time in weeks, she felt something like optimism stirring. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but it was beginning to take shape, not just for her, but for an industry that needed to change. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same calm resolve that had guided her through turbulent skies, and now through the storm of public attention she had never sought but could no longer avoid. The gleaming corporate headquarters of Odyssey Airlines rose like a silver monolith against the Chicago skyline, its glass facade reflecting clouds and sunlight in equal measure. In a spacious corner office on the 38th floor, Captain Maya Jackson stood looking out over Lake Michigan, its vast blue expanse, reminding her of the sky she would soon be commanding again. 6 months had transformed both her life and the aviation landscape in ways she could never have anticipated on that fateful morning at Denver International Airport. Captain Jackson. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 10:30 is here." "Send them in, please," Maya replied, turning from the window. The door opened to admit a group of 4 young pilots, all women. 2 black, 1 Hispanic, 1 Asian, newly hired by Odyssey and assigned to Maya's mentorship program. They entered with the respectful eagerness of professionals meeting someone they admired. "Welcome to Odyssey," Maya said warmly. "Please sit down." As they settled around the conference table, Maya noticed one of them, the youngest perhaps no more than 25, watching her with particular intensity. "I was on that flight," the young woman said suddenly. "Flight 717. I was a passenger in economy. I saw what happened." Maya met her gaze steadily. "Then you understand why we're having this conversation today." "Yes, ma'am. That's why I applied to Odyssey when I finished flight school. Because of what you did that day." The moment crystallized the strange journey Maya had traveled in the past 6 months. What had begun as a humiliating confrontation had transformed into a catalyst for change that was still unfolding across the aviation industry. Horizon Air no longer existed, at least not as an independent entity. After 3 months of financial freefall asset sales and increasingly desperate restructuring attempts, the airline had been acquired by a larger carrier for pennies on the dollar. The once ambitious mid-tier airline had become a cautionary tale in corporate crisis management, its name synonymous with how quickly a company could collapse when operational safety and cultural issues collided with viral exposure. The crew members had mostly found new positions with other airlines. The planes had been repainted. The routes had been absorbed. All that remained of Horizon was a ghost in the aviation memory, and the changes its spectacular fall had triggered. For Regina Wallace and William Bennett, the aftermath had been predictably devastating. Neither had found employment within the aviation industry. The last Maya had heard, Bennett had moved to Arizona to work in his brother-in-law's real estate business. Wallace had filed for bankruptcy protection after legal fees and months of unemployment depleted her savings. Their names had become shorthand in training seminars for the consequences of allowing bias to override professional protocols. More significantly, the incident had catalyzed changes across the aviation industry with a speed that few could have predicted. The Jackson Protocol, as it was now officially known, had been adopted by every major U.S. carrier and was being implemented internationally. The protocol mandated electronic verification of crew credentials, removing subjective judgment from the process entirely. Gate agents now scanned crew IDs with handheld devices that automatically cross-referenced the information against flight assignments, eliminating the possibility of credentials being dismissed or ignored based on appearance. The protocol isn't just about preventing discrimination, Maya explained to her mentees. It's about creating consistent, verifiable security procedures that protect the integrity of the operation. The fact that it also prevents bias from overriding safety protocols is a bonus. The FAA had issued new guidelines requiring airlines to integrate bias awareness into their safety training programs, effectively elevating what had once been considered a soft HR issue to a critical safety component. The reasoning was clear, and compelling biases that led staff to override established protocols represented a potential safety risk that needed to be addressed with the same seriousness as technical malfunctions or weather hazards. Industry hiring practices had also evolved rapidly. Major carriers, seeing the potential business risks of insufficient diversity, had established aggressive recruitment programs aimed at increasing representation of women and minorities in cockpits and management roles. Flight schools reported a surge in applications from young women of color, many citing Captain Jackson as their inspiration. "Our industry is changing," Maya told the young pilots. But change doesn't happen by itself. It happens because individuals make choices, sometimes difficult ones, that force old systems to evolve. For Maya personally, the transformation had been equally profound. After declining to return to what remained of Horizon Air, she had received offers from 7 major carriers. She had ultimately chosen Odyssey Airlines, a carrier known for its progressive culture and technological innovation, where she had been appointed to the newly created position of Chief Standards Officer. In this role, she divided her time between flying as a check airman and overseeing the implementation of safety and operational standards across the airline. The position had been created specifically for her, leveraging both her technical expertise and her newfound status as a symbol of professional integrity. Being a pilot isn't just about flying an aircraft. She continued, looking at each mentee in turn. It's about upholding standards, safety standards, operational standards, ethical standards. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions in the moment. Sometimes it means standing your ground when it would be easier to walk away. After the meeting concluded and the young pilots had departed, Maya returned to her window view of Lake Michigan. In 3 hours, she would command Odyssey Flight 557 from Chicago to San Francisco, a route that carried its own significance, given the destination of the flight. She had been prevented from operating half a year earlier. A knock at her office door interrupted her reflection. Thomas Carter entered, now wearing the uniform of an Odyssey Airlines captain. Like Maya, he had declined to return to Horizon after the incident, accepting an offer to join Odyssey's cadre of check airmen. "Ready for the big return, Captain Jackson?" he asked with a smile. "More than ready," she replied. "It feels like I've been grounded forever." "The crew is excited," Thomas said. "Rodriguez is lead flight attendant today. She specifically requested this assignment." Maya nodded, understanding the significance. Maria Rodriguez had been one of the first Horizon employees to provide a statement supporting Maya's account of the incident. That act of courage had cost her job when Horizon began downsizing, but had earned her a position at Odyssey when the airline learned of her integrity. "Any word on our passenger manifest?" Maya asked. Thomas's smile widened. "VIP in first class. Catherine Sullivan from Quantum." The coincidence, if it was a coincidence, was not lost on Maya. Sullivan had been the witness whose recording had transformed a local incident into a viral phenomenon and corporate catastrophe. Her presence on this flight seemed to close a circle that had opened 6 months earlier. As they walked toward the crew shuttle that would take them to O'Hare International Airport, Maya reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She had never sought to be an agent of change or a public figure. She had simply stood her ground when her professional authority was challenged, a stand that had rippled outward to touch countless lives and transform an industry's understanding of how safety and inclusivity were inextricably linked. The cost had been high months of unwanted attention, the stress of investigations, the knowledge that her stand had contributed to the loss of thousands of jobs at Horizon. But the benefits, both personal and professional, had ultimately outweighed those costs. As they boarded the shuttle, Thomas gave voice to what Maya was thinking. "You know, when this all started, I thought it was just about one bad day at one gate with one airline. I never imagined it would change everything." Maya looked out the window as the Chicago skyline receded behind them. "Neither did I. But maybe it needed to change." O'Hare International Airport pulsed with its usual frenetic energy as Maya and Thomas made their way through the terminal toward the Flight Operations Center. Unlike passengers' flight crew, entered a different ecosystem within the airport, a world of briefing rooms, weather stations, and the quiet camaraderie of professionals preparing to command aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Maya felt the familiar pre-flight focus settling over her, the mental shift from everyday concerns to the precision required for flight operations. It was a state of mind she had missed desperately during her months on the ground. In the crew room, Maya was greeted with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Her story had made her something of a legend among aviation professionals, but today would be the first time many of her new colleagues would fly with her. She felt the weight of their expectations, but remained focused on the task at hand, the safe operation of Flight 557 to San Francisco. The pre-flight briefing was thorough and professional. Maya reviewed the flight plan, weather conditions, aircraft status, and passenger information with methodical precision. When she spoke, the room listened with an attentiveness that went beyond normal professional courtesy. They weren't just hearing a captain. They were witnessing someone whose commitment to standards had transformed their industry. Any questions Maya asked as she concluded the briefing? A young black woman in a first officer's uniform raised her hand. "Captain Jackson, I just wanted to say it's an honor to be on your crew today. I was a flight instructor when everything happened at Horizon. You changed things for all of us." Maya acknowledged the comment with a nod, uncomfortable with the hero worship, but understanding its source. "Thank you, First Officer Rivera. The honor is mutual. Now let's go fly this plane exactly by the book." As they proceeded to the gate, Maya noticed the difference immediately. The gate agent, a middle-aged white man named Peterson, straightened visibly as they approached. He scanned their credentials with a handheld device, the system automatically cross-referencing their IDs against the crew manifest. "Thank you, Captain Jackson, First Officer Rivera. The aircraft is ready for your inspection. Boarding will begin in 30 minutes. The interaction was professional, efficient, and devoid of the subjective judgment that had derailed her career 6 months earlier. This was the Jackson Protocol in action, a system that removed human bias from the verification process, ensuring that every crew member was treated with the same respect, regardless of appearance. "That felt different," Maya murmured to Thomas as they walked down the jet bridge. "Welcome to the post-Jackson era," he replied with a small smile. "No more. Wait outside with the other passengers." Maya grimaced. "I'm never going to live that down, am I? Not in this lifetime, Captain." As Maya conducted her external inspection of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a significant upgrade from the 737 she had been prevented from commanding at Horizon, she felt a surge of emotion that caught her by surprise. This ritual, walking around the massive aircraft and checking its physical condition, had been part of her life for so long that its absence during her grounding had left a void no administrative work could fill. The aircraft was immaculate, its sleek lines and massive engines representing the pinnacle of aviation engineering. This was where she belonged, not in boardrooms discussing policy changes, not in media interviews explaining her experience, but here on the tarmac, preparing to take hundreds of lives safely into the sky and back again. A ground crew member approached, tablet in hand. "Morning, Captain Jackson. We've completed the maintenance inspection and fueling. Everything's in the green." "Thank you," Maya replied, noting the respectful tone, professional, without being deferential. The way it should be. Inside the cockpit, Maya settled into the captain's seat, her hands moving automatically over the controls in a familiar dance of preparation. First Officer Rivera, clearly nervous about flying with the now famous Captain Jackson, followed her lead with eager precision. "Relax," Rivera, Maya said with a small smile. "It's just another flight." "With all due respect, Captain, it's not just another flight," Rivera replied. "Everyone knows who you are and what you did. It matters." Maya nodded, acknowledging the truth in the statement, while refusing to be distracted by it. "What matters right now is this checklist. Let's focus." They worked through the pre-flight procedures with methodical precision. Maya found comfort in the familiar routine, the checklists, the system verifications, the radio communications. This was the structure and discipline that had attracted her to aviation from the beginning, the ordered world where procedure and protocol created safety from chaos. The boarding process proceeded smoothly. Through the open cockpit door, Maya could see passengers filing onto the aircraft, many glancing curiously toward the flight deck when they realized who was in command. She maintained her professional focus, reviewing systems and preparing for departure, but she couldn't help noticing when Catherine Sullivan boarded and took her seat in first class. Their eyes met briefly, Sullivan giving a small nod of recognition, Maya returning it with equal subtlety. No words were exchanged, but none were needed. They were connected by a moment in history that had changed both of their trajectories. As the boarding completed and the cabin door closed, Maya felt a sense of completion. This wasn't just a return to flying. It was a restoration of the natural order that had been disrupted 6 months earlier. She was back where she belonged, doing what she was meant to do. Maria Rodriguez appeared at the cockpit door. "Cabin secure, Captain. We're ready when you are." "Thank you," Maya replied. "Good to have you on the team." Maria smiled. "Wouldn't miss it, Captain. This flight means something." Maya keyed the microphone for her first announcement. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Maya Jackson. On behalf of the entire crew, welcome aboard Odyssey Airlines Flight 557 to San Francisco. Our flying time today will be approximately 4 hours and 15 minutes. We're expecting good weather for most of our journey with some light clouds on approach to San Francisco. We'll be taking off shortly, so please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and all carry-on items are properly stowed." She paused, considering whether to acknowledge the significance of this flight, her return to the cockpit after the incident that had made her name known far beyond aviation circles. In the end, she decided against it. This wasn't about her personal journey. It was about safely transporting 268 passengers to their destination. That had always been the core of her professional identity, regardless of what had happened at Gate B48. "It's a beautiful day to fly," she concluded. "We'll be in the air shortly." As the powerful Dreamliner accelerated down the runway, gathering speed for the miraculous moment when hundreds of tons of metal would defy gravity, Maya felt the familiar surge of joy that had drawn her to aviation since childhood. The aircraft rotated its nose, lifting toward the sky, and then they were airborne, ascending into the limitless blue that had been her workplace and sanctuary for most of her adult life. First Officer Rivera couldn't contain a small sound of satisfaction as they climbed through 10,000 feet and Chicago receded behind them. "Something to share?" First Officer Maya asked, her eyes on her instruments. "Just thinking about how different things might have been," Rivera replied. "If you had backed down that day, if you had just accepted being dismissed, none of this would have happened. The industry wouldn't have changed. I might not be sitting here. It's just, it mattered. What you did mattered. Maya considered the young woman's words as they leveled off at their cruising altitude. She had never sought to be a catalyst for change, had never imagined her stand for professional dignity would ripple so far beyond that moment at the gate. Yet here they were, flying in an industry that had been fundamentally altered because she had refused to accept being told to wait outside. We all have moments where we choose whether to stand our ground or walk away, Maya said finally. I'm glad I chose to stand. But remember, Rivera, I was just insisting on doing my job. That's all any of us can do, really. Do our job, uphold our standards, and trust that the rest will follow. As the Dreamliner soared westward, carrying them toward San Francisco, Maya felt a sense of peace that had eluded her during the tumultuous months following the incident. She was back where she belonged, not as a symbol or a hashtag, but as Captain Maya Jackson, doing the job she had trained for, loved, and momentarily lost. The sky welcomed her back, vast and forgiving, and full of possibility. And as she guided the aircraft through that endless blue, she knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her, but for every pilot who would follow in her wake. 1 year after the incident that transformed both her life and the aviation industry, Captain Maya Jackson stood before a packed auditorium at the International Aviation Safety Summit in London. As the keynote speaker, she faced an audience of industry executives, safety experts, regulators, and pilots from around the world. Maya had initially resisted the invitation to speak. Despite her reluctant public profile, she remained uncomfortable with the spotlight, preferring the cockpit to the podium. But Dr. Sofia Vasquez had convinced her of the importance of sharing her perspective. This isn't about you anymore, Maya, Sofia had said. It's about using your platform to ensure the changes stick, to make sure this becomes permanent transformation, rather than a temporary reaction to bad publicity. As Maya looked out at the expectant faces, she saw her grandmother's pendant. In her mind's eye felt its weight against her skin, and drew strength from the generations of women who had faced down barriers before her. I never intended to become the face of industry change, she began, her voice steady and clear. On that morning at Denver International Airport, I was simply trying to do my job, to access my aircraft, conduct my pre-flight checks, and fulfill my responsibilities as pilot in command. What happened instead has been well documented and extensively analyzed. She paused, allowing the audience to recall the viral video, the corporate collapse, and the industry-wide reforms that had followed. But today, I want to talk about something deeper than protocols and procedures. I want to talk about the fundamental connection between respect and safety in aviation. Over the next 30 minutes, Maya articulated a vision of aviation safety that went beyond mechanical systems and operational checklists to encompass the human factors that could either support or undermine those technical safeguards. When we allow bias, conscious or unconscious, to override established protocols, we create vulnerabilities that no amount of technological advancement can fix, she explained. What happened to me wasn't just about discrimination, though that element was undeniably present. It was about a breakdown in the safety culture that is the bedrock of everything we do in this industry. She described how the Jackson Protocol had been implemented across airlines worldwide, how electronic credential verification had removed subjective judgment from the process, and how bias awareness had been integrated into safety training programs. But she emphasized that technological solutions alone were insufficient. The real change has to happen in how we think about who belongs in positions of authority, she said. When our mental image of a pilot or a captain is limited to one gender or one ethnicity, we create cognitive dissonance that can lead to dangerous lapses in judgment. Expanding that mental image isn't just about inclusion or diversity, as abstract values. It's about creating a safer aviation environment for everyone. As she spoke, Maya noticed a young black woman in the back row, barely out of her teens, watching with rapt attention. The girl's expression, a mixture of awe and recognition, reminded Maya of herself at that age, seeing a black female pilot for the first time, and suddenly understanding that the sky could belong to her too. She concluded with a personal reflection that resonated throughout the hall. I stand before you today, not as someone who sought to change an industry, but as someone who simply refused to accept being diminished in the performance of my duties. The fact that such a simple stand created such profound change tells us something important. The systems we've built are only as strong as the integrity of the people who operate them. Maya paused, touching her grandmother's pendant through her uniform. My grandmother used to tell me, "The sky has no color lines, child. Remember that when the ground tries to hold you back." She cleaned the homes of airline executives her entire life so that my mother could go to college, so that I could attend the Air Force Academy, so that I could eventually stand in a cockpit and command the sky. She never flew on a plane herself, but she made sure I believed I could fly them. Today, I fly for her. I fly for my mother, who taught me that excellence isn't optional for black women. It's a prerequisite just to get in the door. I fly for that gate agent and that station manager, whose failure to see beyond their assumptions created an opportunity for industry-wide change. And I fly for every young person who has ever been told explicitly or implicitly that they don't belong in a position of authority. She looked directly at the young woman in the back row. The sky belongs to all of us. The cockpit belongs to anyone with the skill, the training, and the dedication to command it. And the future of aviation belongs to those who understand that safety and respect are inseparable, that we cannot have one without the other. As she stepped away from the podium to thunderous applause, Maya felt a sense of completion. She had transformed an ordeal into an opportunity not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told, in ways subtle or overt, that they didn't belong in positions of authority. After the conference, Maya found herself speaking with a group of young pilots, women, and men from diverse backgrounds who had been inspired by her story. Among them was the young black woman she had noticed during her speech. "I started flight school because of you, Captain Jackson," she said, her eyes bright with determination and admiration. "When I saw what happened and how you handled it, I realized that's who I want to be, someone who stands their ground when it matters." Maya smiled, recognizing in the young woman the same fire that had driven her own career. "What's your name?" "Simone Taylor, ma'am." "Well, Simone Taylor, let me give you the same advice my mentor gave me. Excellence is your armor. Be so good they can't ignore you. Know your stuff so thoroughly that your authority becomes undeniable. And when the moment comes, and it will come to choose between backing down and standing firm, remember that your stand isn't just for yourself. It's for everyone who will come after you." As Maya returned to her hotel that evening, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She had never aspired to be an activist or a symbol. She had simply wanted to fly aircraft, to command the sky with the skill and authority she had earned through years of dedication and training. Yet her stand at Gate B-48 had catalyzed changes that would benefit countless pilots who didn't fit the traditional mold. The Jackson Protocol was now standard practice across the industry. Bias awareness was integrated into safety training. Recruitment programs were actively seeking to diversify cockpit crews. And perhaps most importantly, the next generation of aviators was entering the field with a broader vision of who belonged in the captain's seat. Maya's personal trajectory had also been transformed. Her position at Odyssey Airlines had evolved to include not just operational duties, but strategic input on safety culture and professional standards. She had been appointed to the FAA's Advisory Committee on Crew Resource Management, and she had established a mentorship program specifically for women of color entering aviation careers. None of this had been part of her plan. All of it had stemmed from a single moment of decision, a choice to stand firm rather than accept being diminished. As she looked out her hotel window at the planes taking off and landing at Heathrow, their lights tracing paths through the gathering dusk, Maya thought about the infinite possibilities contained in such moments of choice. How a single decision made with integrity and courage could alter not just one career or one company, but an entire industry's understanding of itself. The sky had always been her home. Now it was a home she had helped make more accessible to others who would follow in her flight path pilots, who would never know what it was like to be told to wait outside, because they didn't look the part. That, Maya reflected as the last light faded from the horizon, was a legacy worth having. The ripple effects of what became known as the Jackson incident extended far beyond the aviation industry, touching fields as diverse as healthcare, law enforcement, and corporate governance. Within 2 years of the viral confrontation at Gate B-48, training programs based on the Jackson Protocol were being adapted for use in hospitals where studies had shown that female doctors, particularly women of color, often faced similar challenges to their authority. The medical version of the protocol established clear credential verification procedures that removed subjective judgment from the process, ensuring that all physicians received the same recognition regardless of appearance. Before we implemented our version of the Jackson Protocol, I would regularly have patients ask to see the real doctor after I introduced myself, explained Dr. Jasmine Williams, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Chicago Memorial. Now, all physicians wear electronic badges that can be scanned by patients or staff to verify credentials. It's eliminated a whole category of microaggressions and allowed us to focus on what matters: patient care. Catherine Sullivan, whose recording had transformed a local incident into a global conversation, had become an unexpected advocate for workplace accountability. After leaving Quantum Dynamics to found her own consulting firm, she developed what she called the Sullivan Standard, a framework for organizations to evaluate and improve how they handled credential verification and authority recognition across demographic lines. What I witnessed that day wasn't just a failure of 2 individuals, Sullivan explained in a widely shared TED Talk. It was a failure of systems and cultures that allowed those individuals to believe their behavior was acceptable. Changing those systems requires more than diversity training. It requires redesigning our operational procedures to remove the opportunity for bias to override protocol. Her approach was pragmatic rather than punitive, focusing on how organizations could improve safety and efficiency by ensuring that qualified professionals were never hindered in performing their duties due to irrelevant factors like gender or ethnicity. As a Black woman in tech leadership, I recognized immediately what was happening to Captain Jackson that day, Sullivan later shared in an interview. I'd been mistaken for an administrative assistant, questioned about my credentials, and denied access to executive areas countless times in my career. The difference was, when it happens in aviation, lives are potentially at risk. That's why I felt compelled to document it, not to get anyone in trouble, but to expose a systemic vulnerability that needed fixing. The Sullivan Standard had been adopted by companies across multiple industries, from tech giants to manufacturing firms, leading to measurable improvements in operational efficiency and employee retention. Forbes had recently named Sullivan one of the 50 women changing how America does business. Law enforcement agencies had implemented their own versions of bias-resistant identification protocols, with several major police departments requiring body cameras to record all credential verification interactions. The changes came after several high-profile incidents where off-duty officers of color had been detained or disbelieved when identifying themselves as law enforcement. Even the military had taken note, with the Air Force implementing new procedures for flight line access that eliminated subjective factors from the verification process. The changes had been championed by Dr. Sofia Vasquez Maya's mentor, who had emerged from retirement to consult on the implementation. Perhaps most significantly, the incident had sparked a broader cultural conversation about who looked the part in positions of authority. Media outlets had begun consciously featuring more diverse representations of professionals in fields traditionally dominated by white men. Children's books now routinely showed pilots, doctors, and scientists of all backgrounds. Even Hollywood had taken note with a hit medical drama featuring a black female chief of surgery whose authority was central to the plot. Statistics showed encouraging progress. Applications from women and minorities to flight schools had increased by 64% since the incident. Retention rates for female pilots had improved across all major carriers, and a recent industry survey found that 78% of passengers now reported being comfortable or very comfortable with female pilots, up from 52% before the Jackson incident. For Maya personally, one of the most meaningful impacts came in the form of messages from parents whose children had been inspired by her story. Photos of young girls dressed as pilots for Halloween, letters from teenagers who had changed their career plans after learning about her stand, a 7th-grade science project titled The Physics of Breaking Barriers that had won a national competition. These stories reminded her that the impact of one person's integrity could extend far beyond what they might imagine, that standing firm in a moment of challenge could create possibilities for others that would continue long after that moment had passed. 2.5 years after the incident that changed her life, Maya Jackson stood on the tarmac at Denver International Airport, watching as 24 young women in flight suits listened attentively to a pre-flight briefing. These were the inaugural participants in the Phoenix program, a flight training initiative Maya had established for women from underrepresented backgrounds pursuing careers in aviation. The program, funded by a coalition of airlines and tech companies with Quantum Dynamics as the lead sponsor, provided scholarships, mentorship, and hands-on training for promising pilots who might otherwise struggle to afford the expensive path to commercial certification. Today marked their first exposure to commercial aircraft operations, with each participant scheduled to observe from the jump seat during actual revenue flights. Remember, Maya told them, the cockpit is a meritocracy. It doesn't matter what you look like or where you come from. What matters is your skill, your judgment, and your commitment to safety. That's the standard you'll be held to, and it's non-negotiable. The young women nodded, their expressions serious and determined. Many had overcome significant obstacles to reach this point: financial hardship, family skepticism, educational barriers. All of them had been inspired in one way or another by Maya's story. Among them was Simone Taylor, the young woman Maya had met at the London conference. Now, well into her flight training, Simone had emerged as a natural leader among the Phoenix participants, helping others master difficult concepts and maintaining unwavering focus on her goal of becoming a commercial airline captain. Captain Jackson Simone asked as the group prepared to disperse to their assigned flights, "How did you know when to stand your ground? That day at the gate, how did you know it was worth the risk?" It was a profound question, one that Maya had reflected on extensively in the years since the confrontation. Her answer came from that deep well of consideration. "I didn't calculate risks and benefits in that moment," she said. "I simply knew that backing down would mean accepting something fundamentally wrong. Not just wrong for me personally, but wrong for aviation safety, wrong for professional standards, wrong for everyone who would come after me. Some lines can't be crossed. Some compromises can't be made without losing something essential about who you are and what you stand for." She looked at the eager, nervous faces of the young women who represented the future of aviation, a future she had helped reshape through one moment of principled courage. "You'll know your moment when it comes," she continued. "And when it does, remember that you're not just standing for yourself. You're standing for your profession, for your training, for every standard that makes aviation the safest form of travel in human history. That's what gives you the strength to hold your ground, even when it would be easier to walk away. The true power of Captain Maya Jackson's story lies not in the corporate collapse it triggered or the protocols it inspired, but in its demonstration of how a single person standing firm in a moment of challenge can create ripples that transform entire systems. When Maya refused to accept being told to wait outside, refused to be diminished in the performance of her professional duties, she wasn't thinking about changing an industry. She was simply upholding the standards and dignity of her position. Yet that personal stand catalyzed changes that benefited countless others who would never know her name, but would inherit the more equitable aviation world she helped create. Her story reminds us that transformation often begins not with grand gestures or planned campaigns, but with individual moments of courage, moments when someone chooses integrity over expediency, excellence over appeasement, truth over comfortable silence. These choices multiplied across countless lives and situations become the engine of progress in our workplaces, our communities, and our society. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from Maya's journey is that authority earned through excellence cannot be legitimately denied based on appearance, background, or any factor unrelated to capability. In standing her ground at Gate B48, she affirmed a principle essential to any meritocracy, worthy of the name that credentials and competence must always outweigh preconceptions and prejudice. As Maya herself told the young pilots of the Phoenix program, the sky belongs to anyone with the skill and determination to claim it. Through her courage and integrity, she helped ensure that claim would be honored not just for herself, but for every qualified professional who might otherwise have been told to wait outside a door they had earned the right to enter. In that sense, Captain Maya Jackson didn't just return to the sky after her ordeal. She expanded it, making room for all who would follow in her flight path, transforming a moment of injustice into a legacy of opportunity that continues to soar on wings of dignity, excellence, and unwavering principle. If you were moved by Captain Jackson's story of courage and transformation, please hit that like button right now. It helps more people discover this powerful narrative of standing up for what's right. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more inspiring true stories of individuals who changed systems through their personal integrity. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, a friend facing workplace barriers, a young person questioning their path, or anyone who has ever been told to wait outside, share this video with them today. Your share could be the spark that helps someone else find the courage to stand their ground when it matters most. Comment below with your thoughts or similar experiences. Let's continue this important conversation together. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful act of leadership is simply refusing to be diminished.